Rick held back the urge to honk at Hound, who was taking his sweet time to comfort and feed his horse. He had completely forgotten about the damn thing, but Hound did not, as can be seen when he rubbed the red slap mark on his cheek, delivered to him by Hound when he tried to speed past the horse trailer instead of stopping. 2. You should have stopped, Hawk mumbled out while checking his gun from the seat beside him. Rick didn't bother to dignify that with a response. Rick winced and shot an annoyed glare forward. Of course, it was Merle. The man leaned halfway out of the car's roof window, cigarette in one hand, elbow hanging out lazily like he was on a Sunday drive. He grinned like a bastard and slammed the horn again, longer this time, just to be a jackass. 4 Rick swore he could feel his blood pressure spike. Come on, Merle yelled over the roof of the car, his voice carrying across the quiet street. What's the holdup? We're gonna ride in on horseback like fucking cowboys or something? He got smacked in the back of the head by Andrea, who was less than pleased by all the loud noise he was making. Don't honk the fucking car. You want us all to get fucking surrounded? He merely continued to laugh, high off his fucking rocker. 2 Hound finally stepped away from the trailer, dusting his gloves off as the last latch clicked into place with a heavy thunk. He gave the horse a final pat on the neck, murmured something low and quiet to it, probably a damn lullaby, for all Rick knew, then turned toward the car. His boots scrunched softly over the gravel as he approached, calm and unhurried. Rick watched him in the mirror, practically vibrating in his seat, every muscle tight with barely restrained urgency. The backside door opened, and Hound climbed back in like he'd just returned from a casual stroll, not delaying what felt like the most important moment of Rick's goddamn life. He looked at Rick and nodded once. Rick exhaled through his nose, a long, slow breath he'd been holding in for what felt like an eternity. His grip on the wheel eased. Finally, he muttered under his breath, rubbing his cheek again. Then he leaned his arm out the window and waved it in a wide arc toward Glenn's car up ahead. The message was clear: no more delays and no more stops. They were rolling out. Glenn gave a quick thumbs up from the side mirror, and the lead vehicle started forward, tires crunching over broken asphalt. Rick shifted gears and followed close behind, the horse trailer bumping gently behind them as they passed beneath the skeletal tree line and rolled deeper into Atlanta's ruins. He didn't know what he was going to find at the end of this road, but he knew who he was looking for. He was going to find them. God damn it, he was going to find them. Shane adjusted the strap of his rifle across his shoulder as he walked a slow circle around the edge of the camp, eyes sweeping over everything like a hawk watching its territory. The late afternoon sun beat down across the camp and surrounding trees, casting long shadows and drawing sweat down the back of his neck. But he didn't stop. Keeping the camp running wasn't just a job anymore, it was survival. And if he didn't stay on top of everything, everything was going to go to shit. A few kids were stacking empty water jugs by the storage tent, laughing too loudly for his liking. Shane gave them a sharp look, and their laughter quickly died down. They got the message. To his right, Dale was on watch, perched near the camp's front edge with binoculars and walkies. He nodded to him as he passed, earning a quick nod in return. He rounded the far end of the RV and scanned the back row of tents. Andrea's sister was cooking a fish she caught while a few older folks were folding blankets or washing down by the water barrels. Every piece of order here was a thread holding the camp together, and Shane had become the one stitching it all day after day. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't even close, but it worked. They were alive, safe, and fed. And that counted for something. His eyes drifted toward the far corner of camp, past the fire pit and a line of hung-up laundry fluttering in the breeze. That's when he saw them. Shane's pace slowed. Lori was crouched next to a large plastic bin, carefully folding freshly dried clothes while Carl sat beside her, separating socks with a look of boredom on his face. That they were the two people who made all of this worth it. Carl let out a huff as a pair of socks slipped from his lap, and Lori laughed gently, brushing his hair back as she leaned in to help him. Her sleeves were rolled up to her elbows, her cheeks pink from the sun, and she looked a broken bar alive. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. Shane's chest eased, his expression softening into a rare, unguarded smile. Lori looked up, saw him, and smiled back. It wasn't a long look, just a few seconds, but it felt warm on it. "Two runners are back." Dale's voice rang out from atop the RV, breaking the calm like a rock through glass. "And another car is following them." The camp shifted instantly. Shane's smile dropped, and his entire posture changed. Unless they found another usable car in the city, the car following them belonged to someone not part of their group. He turned on a dime and started walking fast toward the front perimeter, weaving through curious onlookers already moving to see what the commotion was about. Dale was squinting through a pair of binoculars, hand shielding his eyes from the sun. Shane climbed the RV ladder quickly and stepped up beside him. "What is it?" "They made it back," Dale said, handing Shane the binoculars. "But they aren't alone. There's another car behind them." "Can't see much from here, but it's armed, a broken bar and dragging a horse trailer." Shane blinked. "A broken bar, a horse trailer?" That got a few confused murmurs from below. People were gathering now, glancing between each other and the road, curiosity mixing with unease. He lifted the binoculars to his eyes and focused in. Sure enough, their beat-up vehicle was at the front, headlights flashing briefly as it turned off the road toward the camp. The second vehicle behind it was far more of a mystery. Sleek, dark, reinforced with matte plates and odd metal seams that weren't standard issue. The trailer attached to the back jostled lightly as the car followed, kicking up dust. He couldn't see much through the tinted windshield, a broken bar, but something about the way it moved made the hairs on his arms stand up. "Who the hell is that?" Dale asked, his voice a bit more cautious now. Shane lowered the binoculars slowly, his jaw tight. "We're about to find out." He turned and called down to the others. "All right, listen up. Our runner group is back, but they've got company. Nobody panic, just stay alert. Keep the exits clear, and don't start anything unless someone gives you a damn good reason." People nodded and began to move, the air buzzing with tension. Lori stepped toward the center of the camp with Carl clinging close, her eyes flicking toward Shane. He met her gaze and gave the slightest nod, reassurance, for now. But inside, his stomach was a knot of uncertainty, because if someone else had found them out here, especially someone organized enough to own that vehicle, then their safe little bubble might be about to pop, and if it came down to it, he would sacrifice everyone in the camp for Law and Carl. He would keep them safe, no matter what it took. The cars rolled to a slow stop just outside the gravel boundary of the camp, kicking up a wave of dust that drifted lazily through the air. People were already gathering near the RV, eyes wide with curiosity and tension, murmurs rising with each passing second. The first door opened on Glenn's car. Amy was the first to react, bolting from the line of laundry with a gasp. Andrea barely had time to turn before her little sister flung herself into her arms, nearly knocking them both over. The older woman wrapped her arms around Amy with a relieved, tearful laugh, squeezing her like she'd come back from the grave. "You came back." Amy laughed into her sister's shoulder. I'm fine, Andrea whispered back, her voice thick. "I'm here, okay?" "I'm here." From the passenger side, Morales stepped out and grinned the moment he spotted his family by their tent. "Me more kids." He sprinted across the open ground, arms outstretched, laughing with pure joy as his wife ran to meet him. His kids clung to his legs the moment he dropped to one knee, and he hugged them all as if they were his entire world. Merle was next, swaggering out of the back seat with a smirk and his usual drawl. "Where's my baby brother at?" Shane, slowly getting down the RV ladder, answered flatly. "Out hunting." "Course he is." Merle chuckled, slapping dust off his pants. "Boys always sniffing around in the woods." Jackie and T-Dog exited quietly after that, scanning the camp like they were seeing it with fresh eyes. They didn't run to anyone, nor did anyone run to them, but they smiled at the sight of families reuniting. Glenn stepped out last, hands on his hips, grinning at the scene like he'd just brought Santa Claus home in the trunk. But Shane's eyes weren't on any of them. His gaze was fixed on the second vehicle, the armored one. The dark beast of a car that sat like a coiled animal, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. No one had come out yet. Just the faint creak of metal from the trailer behind it showed any indication of life. Shane narrowed his eyes and climbed down the ladder, boots hitting the dirt with purpose as he marched toward Glenn. He didn't waste time. "Who the hell are they?" he demanded, his words sharp. Glenn opened his mouth, clearly excited. "Shane, man, you won't believe this." But the click of a car door swinging open cut him off. Every head turned at once. The camp fell silent, keeping a nervous eye on the newcomer. The back passenger door of the armored vehicle closed with a soft thunk. A broken bar and a man stepped out into the light. Uniforms, boots, and a sheriff's badge on his chest. Shane recognized the man the moment he laid eyes on him. Rick Grimes. Alive. Shane's breath caught in his throat, his feet locked in place. The man he'd buried in his heart and mourned in silence. A broken bar stood there, flesh and blood and real as the dirt underneath his feet. The shock hit Shane like a bullet to the gut. "Rick, a broken bar?" he whispered, barely audible. He wasn't the only one who recognized who the man was. "Dad." Carl's voice cracked like thunder through the stunned quiet. Shane turned just in time to see the boy tear past him, legs pumping, eyes wet with tears. Rick dropped to his knees as Carl collided with him in a desperate, crushing hug. The man wrapped his arms around his son, holding him so tight it looked like he'd never let go again. Carl buried his face in Rick's stomach, sobbing openly, words pouring out between gasps. "I knew you were alive. I knew it. I knew it. I'm here," Rick choked out, voice thick, eyes squeezed shut. "I'm here. I'm right here." Shane looked behind him, and his heart froze. Lori stood frozen, her arms limp at her sides, mouth slightly agape. Her heart was thudding so hard in her chest it felt like it might crack open, but she couldn't make her body believe what her eyes were seeing. She let out a strangled breath, as tears welled up in her eyes, the bin of laundry forgotten beside her. Carl's cries echoed in her ears, tugging her like a lifeline back toward the man they had both thought was gone forever. Then she ran across the camp, through the dust and the murmurs and the stunned silence of the crowd. Rick barely had time to look up before she collided into him, arms wrapping around both him and Carl in a desperate embrace that shook with every breath. She buried her face in his neck, sobbing openly now. "Rick, a broken bar. Rick, a broken bar. Oh my God, a broken bar. I'm here," Rick whispered again, voice cracking. He held them both as if they were made of glass and he'd been through hell to piece them back together. Carl's little arms stayed locked around his waist, face hidden in his shirt, while Lori clung to his back like she'd never let go again. Shane stood frozen, heart pounding in his chest like a war drum. Everyone else around them seemed to vanish, and for a long moment, nothing else in the world mattered. The camp stood still. Soft murmurs broke the silence, scattered voices. Some smiled quietly at the reunion. Others glanced sideways at Shane, confusion and curiosity in their eyes. For he didn't meet any of them. Shane stood stiff near the RV, his hand rubbing the back of his neck, eyes locked somewhere off in the distance. He couldn't look, couldn't stand to look. He'd prepared for 1,000 different emergencies, raiders, walkers, and a collapse of order in camp. But this? Rick Grimes walking back from the grave and hugging the very people Shane had come to see as his? No plan covered that. No part of him knew what to do with the shame twisting deep in his gut, or the way his heart squeezed when Lori didn't so much as glance his way. She was wrapped up in Rick now, back in his orbit. Like Shane have never existed. He swallowed hard and looked down, pressing his tongue to the inside of his cheek, jaw tight as a drum. The sounds of sobbing and joy hurt more than they should have. He'd fought so hard to keep them safe. He'd loved them. But he wasn't Rick. And Rick was back. After what felt like forever, the hug finally loosened. Rick pulled away just enough to wipe Cal's tears and brush Lori's hair gently back from her face, cupping her cheek with shaking fingers. He kissed her forehead, whispering something only she could hear. Then he turned. Rick's eyes scanned the camp until they landed on Shane, and without hesitation, he approached. Shane blinked, startled. He straightened slightly, as if bracing himself for something he couldn't define. Rick didn't speak right away. He just reached out a broken bar and pulled Shane into a hug. Shane's eyes widened, caught completely off guard. Rick's voice was full of gratitude. "Thank you for keeping them safe. I don't a broken bar. I don't know how I can ever repay you." 6 Shane hesitated, his meeting Lori's, who quickly turned away, and his jaw clenched. Then slowly, His hands rose and clapped Rick's back once, harder than necessary, tense and stiff. "I did what I had to," he muttered, unsure of what else to say. Rick pulled back with a tired smile, nodding once, his hand gripping Shane's shoulder in thanks. Shane nodded back, forcing a small, tight smile. But inside, everything was unraveling because Rick was back. And nothing a broken bar, nothing would ever be the same. He coughed and pulled out of the hug, taking a step back away from Rick. "How a broken bar? How are you here?" Rick hesitated at Shane's question, before glancing behind him with a flicker of realization. The second car still hadn't opened. The dark armored vehicle sat quiet and still like a beast at rest, but Rick could feel them watching. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes flicking from Shane to the car, then back again. "How broken bar," he muttered, almost to himself. "Right." Rick turned fully, shoulders lifting with a deep breath before letting it out slowly. "I'll explain, just hold on." Shane watched, jaw still tight, as Rick jogged back toward the armored vehicle. His boots kicked up soft puffs of dirt as he went, and Shane's eyes narrowed as his brother in all but blood approached the tinted rear window on the driver's side. Rick leaned down, speaking to someone inside. The words didn't carry, not enough to hear from this far. But whatever he was saying it quietly, almost like someone trying to convince a shy dog it was safe to come out from under the porch. Shane's eyes didn't move from them. Not even when Dale stepped beside him and whispered, "You know that guy?" Shane just nodded his head once, lips pressed into a thin line. Rick spoke firmly to the people inside the vehicle, then took a step back and gestured toward the camp, clearly urging them to exit. There was a pause, a long, silent pause. And then a broken bar. The car door cracked open. Shane felt the mood shift instantly. The low groan of the reinforced metal echoed unnaturally loud in the stunned quiet. A boot stepped out. It was thick, black, and plated. The figure stood tall, wearing sleek matte armor and weapons that draped over his shoulder. And then came the mask. A dragon's face, carved from bone or something like it. It was worn, weathered, and utterly inhuman. Hollow sockets stared out at them, shaped into a permanent expressionless stare. Another door opened. Then another. 2 more masked figures stepped out, each one different, but all eerily similar in how they moved. Coordinated and controlled, like wolves let off a leash but not quite free to run. One of them reached down and patted the German shepherd by his side. Another paused to calmly tighten a glove. Shane's hand immediately dropped toward his rifle. And he wasn't the only one. Dale tensed beside him, Amy cursed under her breath, and Laurie quickly brought her son closer to her side, while whispering, "What the hell, a broken bar?" The camp was locked in sudden, rigid silence. Mothers held their kids close. A few of the men from the tents reached instinctively for whatever blunt tools or weapons they had nearby. Rick raised his hand quickly, stepping between the masked figures and the gathering camp. Hey, it's all right," he called, voice calm but firm. "They're with me." He turned, arms still spread slightly, trying to appear open, non-threatening. "I know they look a broken bar intense," he said, choosing the word carefully. "But they saved my life. When I woke up in the hospital, there was no one there. No staff and no help. I barely made it out of bed before I passed out." He looked at the camp again, meeting Shane's eyes. "They found me, at least, their leader's name," Rick said, nodding toward them who now stood with their arms loosely folded, head slightly tilted. "His name's Leo. He was looking for medical supplies before he found me, bandaged me, and fed me." Rick paused, his voice softening. "He gave me supplies, weapons, and even some of his men just to help me find my family." Shane squinted, gaze darting between the masked men and Rick. "And you trust them?" he asked in disbelief, not moving his hand from his weapon. "With my life," Rick answered without hesitation. There was no bravado in his voice, no forced confidence. Rick turned again, walking slowly toward the center figure, the one in the black mask. He clapped him on the shoulder like an old friend. Shane couldn't explain it, but the way that mask moved a broken bar like it was studying them. Not like a threat, exactly, but like someone taking notes of weaknesses and strengths before walking into a room full of potential targets. "They're friendly," he repeated firmly. Just a broken bar, maybe not the chatty kind. Shane stared at the masked men a moment longer. The one with the hood scanned the tree line behind them, as if seeing something they couldn't see. The one wearing a doctor's coat was looking around, observing the people. 3 and the leader, who Rick was standing by, hadn't moved. But somehow, Shane felt like he was staring straight into his soul, watching and judging. Still, Rick was here. And these people were the reason. Shane lowered his hand from the gun grip, though the tension in his shoulders stayed. "All right," he muttered. "But I want eyes on them at all times." The masked men hadn't spoken a single word, but their presence alone was already affecting the whole camp. And something told Shane a broken bar they weren't just passing through to bring Rick back to his family. I want to punch him so fucking bad, Hound growled in their link while glaring daggers at Ed Peltier, who was busy ordering his wife around. 3. Not yet, Hound. Hawk ordered him while keeping an eye on Shane, the one who was labeled a wild card. Not until we can make it look like an accident. Their stance was relaxed, but anyone who knew them would notice the subtle tells. The deep breath they took to calm down, the slow drag of their eyes across each cluster of survivors, the twitch of a gloved finger as it brushed the stock of weapons on their person. Their eyes didn't rest in one place for more than a few seconds. They noted the strong ones, the nervous ones, the loud mouths, and the liabilities. A few had knives on their belts, some carried makeshift spears or bats. Hawk had seen all types before. It was Shane who set his internal alarms buzzing. The man's shoulders were drawn tight like a stretched-out wire, the kind of posture that said he would survive not by luck, but by choosing to be the last bastard standing. They didn't miss the way Shane looked at Rick, like something he owned had been ripped right out of his chest. He might be a problem in the future. Hawk muttered through the link, his voice low and dry. Agreed, Hound replied, arms still folded across his chest, jaw visibly tight behind the carved dragon mask. "Give me 5 minutes and I'll solve it." "We're not solving people yet," Doc cut in, his tone soft but resolute. "Let's not start something until we have logistics established and a formal sit-rep on the living conditions here." "Ugh, always so boring, Doc," Hound muttered. "I'm literally you," Doc answered coolly. He stood just a little apart from the others, his long coat fluttering slightly in the breeze. "And for the record, I call dibs on punching that Ed guy. If you do it first, I'm going to accidentally inject you with a paralytic. Just enough to make you piss yourself." 7 If they weren't being watched, Hound would have sixed Coco on him. "Try it, nurse boy. See how that goes for you." "Are you two done?" Hawk snapped, his voice razor sharp. "We're being watched. Focus." He wasn't wrong. The camp hadn't relaxed despite what Rick said, not even a little. While some returned to folding laundry or comforting their kids, most were still casting sidelong glances at the newcomers. Rick's reassurance only went so far. Hound's hand twitched toward his belt, his attention focused back on Ed. "I can make it look like a walker bit him during when he goes to take a piss." "Not yet," Hawk repeated through gritted teeth. Doc, meanwhile, had pulled a battered notebook from one of his coat pockets and began jotting things down with a pencil stub. "You're not fixing anything until they relax around us," Hawk reminded him. Doc didn't look up. "I'm just taking notes." "Camp's stretched thin," Hound noted, looking at the rather malnourished faces. "Their defense perimeter is laughable. No simple alarm lines, only one lookout point, and 0 fallback points," Doc added. "All of this could collapse if a herd stumbles through." "Or raiders," Hound muttered darkly before turning his attention to a child's laugh rang out nearby, soft, tired, but genuine. They all turned slightly. It was Carl. Rick's son was clinging to his father's hand now, looking up at him like he was the son while talking about everything he went through while he was gone. "At least someone's happy," Hawk said after a moment, voice more distant. Doc looked over his shoulder toward the horse trailer. "Are we still bringing Daisy out?" "Of course, she deserves to walk on grass again. Besides, she's more emotionally intelligent than half of the people in this camp. Too careful, Coco might get jealous." Hawk lightly teased their dog specialist. Hound desperately wanted to flip him off, but couldn't with all the eyes on them. Despite themselves, A faint thread of amusement curled between them. The link fell quiet for a beat. Then Hawk broke the silence, serious this time. Orders are the same. We stay invisible, unless someone needs help, and if anyone causes problems. A broken bar. Their masks gave off ominous intent. They drove in silence. Mother and son did not say a word as the car hummed along the winding road, the school growing smaller in the rearview mirror. The only sounds were the low rumble of the engine and the occasional sound of tires against pavement. Minutes passed as the silence prevailed. Then finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Wanna talk about what happened at school?" She didn't look at him right away, just kept her eyes on the road, hands firm on the steering wheel, but she glanced at him out of the corner of her eye. Her son shifted in his seat. His head bowed low, his small frame curled inward like he was trying to disappear. "A broken bar. I punched my teacher," he mumbled, voice cracking, almost swallowed by the hum of the car. She knew that much, but her 10-year-old son can knock out a grown man is beyond her. His fingers clutched at the fabric of his pants, knuckles whitening, hands trembling in his lap. She frowned, her heart ached at the sight, an ache only a mother feels when her child is hurting and won't say why. She slowed the car and pulled over, and turned to look at her son. "Can you tell me why you punched your teacher?" she asked gently. There was a pause, a long one. His lips moved, but the words were too quiet to catch. "I didn't hear that," she hummed, trying not to scare him. "Sweetheart, please tell me why you punched Mr. Dalton." He bit down hard on his lower lip, as if trying to keep the words from spilling out. Then, with a shaky breath, he finally looked up, eyes glassy, face pale with guilt, and something else. Broken bar fear. "Yeah, broken bar. I fell asleep in class," he said, barely above a whisper. "I had a broken bar. I had another nightmare." She didn't interrupt, listening patiently. "When Mr. Dalton tried to wake me up, a broken bar. I didn't see him. I saw a broken bar. I saw." His voice hitched, his body trembling harder now. "I saw a walking corpse. Its face was all rotten and its mouth was open and it was leaning over me like it was going to bite me." His voice broke. "So I punched it. I didn't mean to punch Mr. Dalton. A broken bar. I thought a broken bar." He choked back the rest, covering his face with both hands as tears slipped down his cheek. The silence returned, but this time it was painfully heavy. She reached out, one hand leaving the wheel to rest gently on his shoulder. Her thumb moved in slow, comforting circles, grounding him. "It's okay," she whispered, voice as warm and steady as she could manage. "You're okay. You're safe, I promise." His shoulders shuddered beneath her hand, quiet sobs escaping as he kept his face buried in his hands. Then, after a moment, she gave his shoulder a soft squeeze. "Tell you what," she said, gently wiping a tear from his cheek with her sleeve. "How about I make your favorite dinner tonight, huh? Extra crispy chicken tenders, curly fries, and what else?" she playfully asked, trying to distract him. His hands slowly lowered from his face. His eyes were red and wet, his nose was sniffling, but despite it all, he gave her the tiniest, trembling smile he could. "A broken bar. Mac and cheese," he mumbled, his voice still wobbly. Too. She grinned and brushed a bit of hair from his forehead. "Of course, can't forget the mac and cheese." He sniffed again and tried to smile wider, even as more tears gathered in his eyes. Thanks, Mum." She chuckled softly and tapped the tip of his nose with her finger. "You're adorable, you know that?" Immediately, his face scrunched up in protest as a faint blush colored his cheeks. "I'm not adorably broken bar. I'm cool," he grumbled, folding his arms and pouting at the dashboard. Her laugh rang out, light and sincere. "Cool and adorable can go hand in hand, you know." He groaned in mock defeat, but she could see the way he relaxed just a little in his seat. The way some of the weight seemed to lift from his shoulders. But even as she laughed, even as she comforted him and filled the car with warmth again, a broken bar part of her heart still ached. These dreams, these nightmares, they were getting worse, and all she could do was be there for her son. 3 The sun sat high in the sky, casting long shadows that crept between tents and fluttering laundry lines. Camp life moved with a tense sort of rhythm, people doing chores, others resting, but all carrying the weight of survival like a second skin. Shane walked the perimeter with practiced ease, scanning, checking, always watching for trouble. Beside him, silent as a shadow, walked Hawk. The masked man said nothing, didn't so much as hum or grunt, and it was getting on Shane's nerves. How Rick managed to convince him to take Hawk on his patrol was beyond him. "You gonna say anything?" Shane muttered, "or just walk there like a mute?" Hawk tilted his head, the blank, dragon face of his mask catching the light for a moment before he responded. "I figured I'd let you talk first. You seem the type." Shane snorted while waving at a passing survivor he was acquainted with. "The type, huh?" Hawk didn't answer that. He just kept walking at his side, boots crunching against the forest floor. Shane scratched the back of his neck, glancing sideways at him. "1 broken bar. So, you guys here to help or just scare the hell out of everyone and make us guess?" "We're here to help," Hawk said simply. "Whether you believe that or not's up to you." "That right?" Shane squinted. "You don't exactly inspire a whole lot of confidence, sneaking around, saying damn near nothing, wearing those creepy-ass masks. Makes people wonder what you're hiding." "We're hiding a lot," Hawk said without hesitation, already knowing Shane was never going to fully trust them. Shane blinked, thrown off by how confidently he said that. "That's supposed to be funny." "Are you laughing?" A broken bar. They walked in silence again, rounding the far edge of camp, where some chairs and a fire pit sat unused. "A broken bar you hunt?" Hawk asked, breaking the quiet this time. Shane raised a brow, not expecting him to ask that question of all questions. "Yeah, whenever I get the chance. Used to do it with Rick sometimes, out by the lake." "Those were the days." "Ever fish?" Another unexpected question. Why was this guy asking him these random things? They passed by Glenn, who was busy cooking a can of beans with a smile on his face. The smile got even bigger when Hawk waved at him as they walked by. "Hell yeah. Me and Rick fished damn near every weekend before everything went to hell." "What about you?" Hawk gave a short nod before answering. "Fishing's my favorite pastime." That surprised Shane more than it should have. "You, fishing? Thought you boys were too busy skulking through the dark and scaring the shit out of people." "Doesn't mean I can't enjoy a hobby," Hawk replied with a shrug. Shane huffed a laugh at him, not disagreeing with what he said. "Suppose not. Watch sports before all this?" "Not really. Figures. Though I always liked hockey." "Of course you like hockey," Shane said, grinning a little now. "Figures you'd like the only sport where punching a guy is part of the damn game." Hawk shrugged. They walked a few more steps before Shane glanced over again. "So why Hawk? That your call sign or some shit?" The answer he got was short and fast. "Shot 5 walkers and a hawk with 1 bullet." Shane stopped walking and stared at the man. "Bullshit. Bullshit or not," Hawk replied without missing a beat. "It's how I got my name." "How the hell do you have a question mark?" "Never mind. That's the dumbest thing I've heard all day." Hawk just stared at him. Shane grumbled something under his breath and shook his head, but there was the ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. That's when the shouting started. A sharp, ugly voice rose from across the camp like a crack of thunder. "Sophia, get your ass away from that masked freak." Both men immediately turned toward the noise. "Shit," Shane muttered, already moving. Hawk sighed to himself when he spotted who it was causing the ruckus, face-palming. It had barely been a fucking day. Hound _Hound felt the eyes following him and Coco as they walked around the camp. He didn't need to look to know who was watching. Practically everyone was. Despite it being a whole day since they've been here, that was the thing about wearing a dragon mask for a face. People noticed. And they feared what they couldn't understand. He and Coco made a slow, casual circuit around the perimeter, eyes darting to weak spots in the defense, the way some tents were too far out from the rest, and the unsecured supplies that were unguarded. He said nothing, but noted everything. Eventually, he returned to the side of the RV and sat down on an old metal cooler, the frame creaking under his weight. He unsheathed his combat knife and dragged a whetstone slowly along the blade with rhythmic precision. Shka broken bar, shka broken bar, shka broken bar. Each motion carved through the silence with quiet menace. If they weren't scared before, they were probably pissing themselves now. Coco sat beside him, alert but calm, ears twitching at distant sounds. Her fur was dark and glossy, her eyes sharp and intelligent as they swept across the camp with practiced ease. Hawk and Doc had disappeared some time ago, probably doing recon, establishing entry points, or maybe just poking around for information like they always did. Hound didn't ask. Didn't need to. They'd report back when they were ready. Then, just beneath the sound of stone against steel, Hound heard something. Tiny footsteps. Light, hesitant footsteps. He froze mid-drag. The blade angled just so, then slowly turned his head. A small army of children stood behind him in a loose semicircle. You should know. You all of them stared wide-eyed at Coco. None of them dared to move closer, despite clearly wanting to. Their little hands were clenched at their sides, feet fidgeting against the dirt, bodies practically trembling with restraint. The youngest looked like they were vibrating from the effort it took not to launch forward and bury their faces in Coco's fur. Coco, for her part, simply tilted her head, ears perked, tail wagging, watching them as curiously as they were watching her. Hound smiled behind the mask. He turned his body just slightly toward them, knife resting across his knee, voice low and gentle. "Well?" he asked. "You kids need something?" The wall of children shuffled uncomfortably. Then, breaking the silence, a single voice spoke up. Carl Grimes led the charge. He stepped forward just a little, chin tilted up, voice steady despite the nervous flutter in his chest. "Can we a broken bar? Can we pet your dog?" 7 Hound blinked. He let the question hang in the air for a second. Then another. Just long enough to watch them all start to twitch and squirm like they were standing on hot coals. Even Carl's confidence faltered a bit under the weight of his silence. Then he turned to Coco. The shepherd was already looking up at him, eyes wide, ears pinned slightly back, tail giving a single hopeful thump against the dirt. Hound exhaled a quiet huff of amusement. "Have at it," he said, jerking his chin. The effect was immediate. A wave of delighted squeals and excited chatter erupted as the kids rushed forward all at once, arms outstretched, hands eager. Coco let out a low, happy boof and sat tall and proud, basking in the praise like she was born for it. Absolutely putty in their hands. Little fingers scratched behind her ears, stroked her back, and giggled when she licked their hands or rolled onto her side for belly rubs. Hound just leaned back against the RV, blade forgotten for the moment. He watched with a smile as the dragon mask loomed behind a scene of innocent chaos. But all good things must come to an end. He heard them before he saw them, footsteps pounding on dirt, the sharp clatter of raised voices, and the unmistakable tone of parental panic. A group of adults, the children's parents, hurried to the kids in a flurry of urgency, their expressions a mix of fear, anger, and disbelief. "You are. What did I say about wandering off? Don't ever go near him without telling me." Mothers and fathers swarmed in, grabbing tiny arms and shoulders, pulling their kids back from Coco like they were snatching them from a live wire. The children whined in protest, a few trying to pet Coco one last time before being dragged away. "She's nice," one kid cried, reaching back toward the shepherd. "He let us," another insisted. But the adults weren't listening. Their eyes kept flicking to his mask, and every glance carried suspicion and fear, as if they were trying to hide it but failing miserably. He said nothing. He simply watched, blade now sheathed, expression unreadable. The shepherd stood calmly amid the chaos, tail slowing but still wagging as the last of the children were pulled away. Coco's ears flicked, her gaze following the retreating figures, and she let out a soft, almost disappointed whine. And then a broken bar. There were two. Carl and Sophia were the only ones left. The girl stood with her hands clasped around her doll, nervously shifting from foot to foot, but not retreating. Her mum, Carol, was nowhere in sight, probably still hanging damp clothes on the line or scrubbing something by the river. And Cal. He stood beside Coco with one hand resting on her back like it was the most natural thing in the world. His eyes glanced at Hound with curiosity, no fear in sight, and his body remained relaxed. Hound tilted his head slightly, watching both of them. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "Your parents forgot about you too? Or did you sneak off while they were busy?" Carl gave a tiny shrug. "Dad trusts you, and he knows I can take care of myself." Sophia looked up shyly while petting his canine. "My mum is doing laundry and said I could play with the other kids," she murmured, not looking at him and looking only at Coco. "She's really cute." Coco, as if understanding, stepped forward and gently nudged Sophia's hand with her nose. The girl giggled quietly and stroked her fur again, softer this time, more grateful. "Can she do any tricks?" "One of my friends has a dog that can shake," she excitedly asks him, eyes full of expectation. Carl nodded in agreement, his head just as excited. "Does she know any tricks?" "PFFT. Listen here, Pipsqueak. Coco is best dog. And I'll have you know I trained her myself," he said proudly, puffing out his chest with Coco doing the same. Carl and Sophia looked at each other before looking back at him. "A broken bar so she knows tricks?" she asked again, hesitantly. He sighed to himself before nodding. "Yes, she knows tricks. She knows all the tricks your little heart can ask for." That got them charged up. "Really? All the tricks?" He simply nodded his head. "Sit." Sophia went first with something simple. Coco sat. "Roll over." Carl went next with a little bit more complicated trick. Coco rolled. The kids clapped and wowed, giving his dog enough praise to inflate her head the size of Rushmore. Taking a moment to think, Sophia clapped when she came up with a command that she was sure Coco couldn't do. "Do a flip." Coco did a flip. 5 Whoa! The little girl gasped out in delight, which was followed by Carl's jaw-dropping barrel roll. Carl jumped up and down. And would you believe it? Coco did a barrel roll. Sophia looked at Hound in awe and amazement, having a completely new opinion of him. Hound leaned back again against the RV, arms crossing as he watched them play with Coco. Content. Of course, just as he was about to relax, he heard more footsteps coming his way. Hound sighed tiredly before looking to where the footsteps were coming from and tensed at who it was. Ed Peltier. 4 Stomping towards them with an ugly scowl on his face with a fucking can of beer in his hand, clearly drunk out of his mind. Hound glanced at Sophia and frowned when he saw how she was now hugging her doll as if it was a lifeline. He stood up while whistling softly, causing Coco to become alert and stand guard in front of the kids. Ed's voice cut through the camp like a blade. "Sophia, get your ass away from that masked freak." His words came slurred, sharp, and soaked in beer. The can in his hand sloshed with each angry step as he stormed toward them, red in the face, jaw clenched tight with ugly rage. Sophia flinched as she curled in on herself, arms tightening around her doll like she was trying to disappear. Carl stood his ground beside her, but even he shifted closer to Coco, his hand instinctively gripping the fur at her neck like she was his shield. Ed didn't care about how he was scaring the kids or how he was making his own daughter quiver in fear. "Don't you go near my daughter, you son of a bitch," he barked, stepping forward and pointing the half-crushed can of beer like a weapon. "I don't care what that motherfucker said. You think I'm gonna let some psycho with a mask lurk around my—" He tried to reach past them, his hand outstretched towards Sophia. Hound stepped in his way. No warning, no words, just a wall of unmoving black armor hidden underneath his coat, and a cold, unreadable menace. Ed's hand stopped mid-reach, barely a breath away from Hound's chest plate. For a long moment, neither moved. Then Ed sneered, too drunk to realize the danger he was in. "The hell you gonna do, huh?" Big man with a dog and a Halloween costume. "Fucking freak!" Hound said nothing. Just stared at the drunk man in front of him with disdain. Something dangerous shifted behind those hollow eye sockets, something that promised pain and agony. "I'm talking to you, arsehole," Ed shouted, stepping forward and throwing the only thing in his hand. The beer can hit Hound square inches the chest. Foam splattered up his coat, soaking into the fabric. A few drops ran down the bone of his mask, sliding like rivers down a skull. Gasps erupted from nearby. More than a few heads turned. Murmurs started as they watched, like the bystanders they were. People stopped what they were doing. Dale came around the RV when he heard the sound of yelling. Amy and Andrew exchanged unsure looks as they stopped what they were doing to watch the ensuing disaster. Laurie was stepping out of her tent along with her husband, both confused as to what the screaming was all about. Shane was already halfway to his feet from the other side of camp, glaring murder at Ed. Hound still hadn't moved. Carl and Sophia huddled behind Coco, who was now fully bristling, a low growl barely restrained in her throat. Her eyes locked on Ed like she was waiting for one command, just one, from her human to tear his throat apart. Hound's hands twitched at his sides. Every muscle in his body was screaming at him to punch this bastard, to break every bone in his body, to shatter his teeth on the gravel and let the mask be the last thing he ever saw. But he didn't. Not until Hawk gave the go-ahead. A broken bar. Ed puffed up in a way similar to a peacock, like he'd want something when Hound did nothing and said nothing. Completely missing the way Hound's entire posture had shifted from calm to coiled, like a slaughter about to be unleashed at any moment. "I knew it," Ed sneered. "You ain't shit. Just a coward hiding behind a bitch-ass dog and a stupid mask. You're not scaring me." Hound tilted his head again, slow and deliberate. Did this motherfucker just insult Coco? To a broken bar. Fuck it. He'll apologize to Doc later. Ed's sneer didn't last long. Hound's fist connected cleanly with Ed's jaw, a devastating punch that sent the drunk bastard crashing onto the dirt like a dropped sack of bricks. There was a sound, sharp, sudden, and brutal as his fist connected with the bastard's face. The sound was a satisfying crunch and Ed Peltier went tumbling down. The man didn't even scream, too stunned by the pain and impact as blood and two of his teeth splattered out from his mouth. The entire camp recoiled as if they were struck themselves. Gasps and screams rang out. Coco didn't move. She stayed rooted beside the kids, watching her human with unwavering focus as he dealt with the problem. Ed groaned in pain, trying to get up, but Hound wasn't finished. He stepped forward and loomed over the man like a judgment rendered in flesh. The mask tilted downward, casting a deep, skeletal shadow over Ed's bleeding face. He drew his knife, a long, gleaming blade unsheathed with a whispering slide of steel. The camp erupted in a gasp of shock, but they did nothing but watch like the fucking bystanders they were. "Whoa, whoa, stop, Hound." Rick's voice cut through the noise like a gunshot as he rushed towards the man. "Drop the damn knife," Shane screamed, getting there at the same time as Rick, gun drawn, already aiming it squarely at Hound. Hound didn't even flinch. He kept his focus on Ed, who was now on his back, scrambling backward with his elbows, heels scraping the dirt, eyes wide with pure fear and panic. "Stop!" Rick shouted again, turning to Shane. "Put the gun down, you out of your damn mind? He's about to gut that bastard." Shane barked. "I said drop it," Rick shouted, and then, without another word, he reached out and snatched Shane's gun right out of his hand. "What the fuck?" Shane turned, betrayed, stunned. "Rick, I'll handle this," Rick said, eyes locked on Shane, not backing down. But Hound didn't react to either of them or the trash crawling on the dirt. His gaze had shifted, past Ed, past the adults gathering in a shocked half-circle around them, and back a broken bar to the children. To Carl, to Sophia. Sophia was trembling, her little hands clutched her doll so tight the fabric groaned. Her eyes, those big, round, frightened eyes, were locked on him. No longer with admiration or broken bar but with fear. She reminded him of someone he hadn't been in a long time. Hound exhaled through his nose, low and heavy. Then, without warning, he moved. The knife came down, causing the people who were watching to either scream or look away in fright. But the knife did not penetrate flesh, but dirt. He stabbed it beside Ed's head, the tip burying itself inches from the man's skull. Ed flinched so hard he screamed, half rolling to one side like he expected to die right then and there. Broken bar silent and the smell of piss was strong. Leaning in low, close enough for his breath to ghost over Ed's bloodied cheek, he spoke just above a whisper, but with a voice colder than steel. "The only reason you're not dead right now, a broken bar, is because of your daughter?" Ed whimpered. Hound tilted his head slightly, his voice quieter still, just for Ed to hear, and no one else. "So listen, and remember my words, you insignificant fucking, because the next time you do something that pisses me off or broken bar, I will make you regret ever being born." His words were more of a promise than a threat. "Do you understand?" Ed nodded frantically, too terrified to speak, saliva mixing with the blood on his chin. Hound straightened up without another word. He yanked the knife from the earth and spun it once before sliding it back into its sheath. Then he turned his back on Ed, cold and without hesitation, and walked over to Carl and Sophia. They looked up at him, still shaken. He reached out and placed a gloved hand gently on Sophia's and Carl's heads. "I'm sorry you had to see that." A silent apology only they can hear. Then turned and walked away, Coco trailing beside him, tail low. Rick knelt beside Ed, glaring at the man, but didn't say anything as he checked his broken jaw. Shane just stood there, gunless, confused, and angry. And around the camp, people whispered as they watched Han walk away. "What the hell do you mean, you're sending him to a mental hospital?" she shouted, her voice cutting through the house like shattered glass. "I mean exactly what I fucking said," he barked back, standing in the kitchen, his frame towering, fists clenched at his sides. He punched his teacher, saying some bullshit about a corpse about to bite him. "The entire neighborhood is talking behind our backs, pointing their fingers at us." He was scared. He had a nightmare. A nightmare is one thing, but seeing a corpse in place of a person is another. He's clearly not right in the head. She marched toward him, fury in her eyes, trembling with the weight of everything she had held back. "You don't get to twist this into something it's not. He is not violent, and he is not dangerous. He is a good boy. Asuna, he's a psychopath in the making," he thundered, slamming his hand against the countertop. "And your constant coddling is only making it worse. You're gonna get yourself fucking killed if you keep pretending nothing's wrong with him." Her face flushed red with rage. "I'm treating our son as the innocent child he is," she hissed, her voice low and sharp, trembling like a drawn bowstring. "Because someone has to." "Because you." She jabbed a finger into his chest, getting an angry glare from him. "You gave up on him the second he showed signs of being different," he sneered, face twisting with contempt as he started walking out of the kitchen. "I see the way he looks at people, like he's not even there, as if he's seeing things that no one else can see but him." "You think that's fucking normal?" he roared out, spit flying as he did. "And you think locking our son away is going to fix him?" she screamed, voice rising with desperation. "He needs his parents, not people in lab coats who'll treat him as if he is insane. He needs love, understanding, and patience." "God damn it. I'm doing my best, but I can't do it alone." "He needs a father, Richard. And you sure as hell haven't been there for him." A bitter silence as they glared at each other, neither one backing down. Then the smell hit her. She narrowed her eyes, stepping closer, searching his face, and there it was. The faint wobble in his stance. The red flush in his cheeks. The way his pupils were just a little too wide. She sniffed once, then again. Her stomach twisted. "A broken bar. Are you fucking drunk?" she asked, quietly, horrified, making him take a step back. "You promised me you would stop drinking," he scoffed, bloodshot eyes glaring down at her. "That was before I found out our kid was a fucking monster." The words struck like a whip. Her heart stopped cold. "A broken bar? Don't you fucking call him that," she growled, stepping towards him, hands clenched. He turned away from her, pacing back and forth. "He is not a monster," she cried, her voice raw, cracking with weight. "He's just a little boy, who's terrified by his dreams, who wakes up screaming and crying for his parents, who doesn't understand what's happening to him. He's confused, he's hurting, and all you're doing is standing here and calling him things he's not. Like he's something we're just supposed to throw away and forget." Her voice broke, a sob catching in her throat. "Why, you are supposed to be his father." He punched the wall of their hole, leaving a crack in the wood. "He's not normal." "Wake the hell up," he roared, stepping closer. "I see what you refuse to see. He's not right." No kid wakes up screaming about walking corpses unless something's wrong in his head. She did not back down. "Something is wrong in your head if you think for 1 second I'm going to let you throw our son away like he's trash. Your son, that little monster, is Noah!" "Get the fuck out of my house," she screamed, her voice raw, reverberating off the walls. "You don't get to say that about him. You don't get to be here if that's how you see our son." Her chest heaved as she pointed toward the door, face flushed and wet with tears she refused to wipe away. Her husband's eyes narrowed, his jaw clenching as rage twisted across his face. "You think yelling makes you right?" he snapped, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. "You think your bleeding heart means anything? That kid's going to kill you and you're too fucking blind to see it. Too, and you're too fucking drunk to care." She snapped back, stepping closer until they were inches apart. "You're nothing but a coward hiding behind a bottle and lashing out at a child because you're too fucking weak to handle reality." His face twisted, the words hitting something deep, something rotting inside him. And without war a crack his hand lashed out. For her head snapped to the side from the force of the slap. The sound echoed through the house like thunder, followed by the sickening thud of her body hitting the hardwood floor. She didn't move for a moment. Then slowly, shakily, she brought a trembling hand to her cheek, which was already blooming red and beginning to swell. Tears streamed down her face as she gasped in pain, disbelief, and heartbreak all at once. Richard towered over her, chest heaving, hands shaking, not with regret, but with barely contained urge to do more than just a slap. "We should have gotten rid of him when we had the chance," he coldly spat out, before he turned and stormed toward the door. The whole house rattled as the door slammed shut behind him. She stayed there on the floor, alone, hand still pressed to her bruised face, staring blankly at the door her husband left through a broken bar. She should have gotten up, should have picked herself up off the floor and fought back, screamed, raged, done something, anything. But she didn't. Her hand slipped from her cheek as her shoulders shook. The breath caught in her chest as a sob punched its way out of her throat, raw and ugly, as though her ribs were trying to collapse from the weight inside her. She pressed both hands to her face, trying to hold everything in, but it spilled out anyway. Shaking cries, broken gasps, the kind of weeping that scraped along her throat like broken glass. She wasn't crying just because of the slap. It was everything. The years of walking on eggshells. The nights spent pretending everything was fine for the sake of her son. The quiet fear that this moment, this exact moment, was always coming. Now it has. And she felt like she was breaking. Her sobs came fast and uncontrollable, her body folding in on itself, arms wrapped around her knees as she cried into the silence. She didn't even try to hold it back, didn't try to be strong. She just wept, painfully, openly, like something inside her had cracked wide open. She stayed there for a long moment, on the floor, heart breaking, soul unraveling. The memories swirled, her son's first giggle, his tiny hand wrapping around her finger, the way he used to call her mama before he learned to say mum. His laughter, his innocent questions, the way he desperately clung to her after his first nightmare. A broken bar, not a monster. Never a monster. Mum? The soft voice pierced through the silence like a needle through silk. She froze. Her breath hitched in her throat as she slowly turned her head toward the stairs. There, barely visible in the dim light of the hallway, stood her son. Pajamas rumpled, small hands curled tightly at his sides, and those familiar blue eyes shimmering with fresh tears. His lip trembled. Her heart shattered all over again. Sweetheart, a broken bar, she whispered, trying to gather herself, trying to push the pain down, bury it deep where he wouldn't see. She attempted a smile, strong and warm, just for him. But the moment her cheek moved, white-hot pain shot through her face like lightning, and she flinched. He noticed. His expression crumpled. She held her cheek for a moment, then lowered her hand slowly, breathing through her nose to steady herself. "How long have you been up?" she asked gently, her voice hoarse. He didn't answer. "A broken bar, how much did you hear?" His head dropped in shame. A silence heavier than anything that had come before settled between them. He looked so small standing there in the hallway, shoulders hunched, pajamas hanging off his thin frame, eyes red-rimmed and filled with guilt too big for his tiny body. She sighed softly, blinking through her own tears, and opened her arms. "Come here, baby." He hesitated, but took one slow step, then another, until he ran into her arms with all the force his little body could manage, throwing himself into her embrace and clinging to her like she was the last safe place in the world. She wrapped her arms around him, holding him close, tucking his head beneath her chin as fresh sobs tore from his chest. I'm sorry," he cried, muffled against her shirt. "I'm sorry for being a bad son. I'm sorry for getting you hurt. I'm sorry for being a monster." Her arms tightened around him. "No," she whispered fiercely, her voice trembling but sure. "Don't say that. Don't you ever say that." "But Dad said a exclamation mark. He said I was he hiccuped, voice breaking, "a monster, and it's my fault. Everything's my fault. No, sweetheart, Look at me. She gently pulled back just enough to cup his face in her hands, flinching again from the pain in her cheek, but pushing through it for him. She tilted his head up so their eyes met, hers filled with tears, his overflowing. You are not a monster, do you hear me? Her thumb wiped at the tear tracing down his cheek. You are my son. You are kind, caring, and brave, even when you're scared. He shook his head weakly, but she pressed her forehead against his and whispered, I'm sorry you had to see that. I'm so sorry. He sniffled, hands trembling as they gripped her shirt. It's my fault, a broken bar. No, she said again, firmer now. None of this is your fault. Not the nightmares, not the fighting, not tonight. A broken bar, nothing. They sat there on the floor, wrapped in each other, mother and son surrounded by the echo of a broken home. She kissed the top of his head, ignoring the way her cheek screamed at the movement. I will always love you. 9. Calmly walked along the edge of the lake, hands tucked loosely in his coat pockets, boots crunching over the packed dirt with every step. The water lapped quietly at the shore, light dancing across its rippling surface as the sun dipped lower in the sky. His gaze found Hound easily, sitting in the grass like a statue with his dragon mask catching the last of the fading light. Daisy, his newly acquired horse, knelt beside him without a care in the world, lazily chewing through a carrot he gave her. Coco was curled up on the other side, her head resting on Hound's lap, eyes half-lidded as she leaned into his hand for an ear scratch. 5. Doc stopped a few feet away, taking a moment to take it all in. Then he sat down beside him, not close enough to crowd, but not too far either. Both of them stared out at the water. For a while, neither of them said anything as they enjoyed the beauty of nature, but Doc wasn't here for the view. A broken bar. The people at the camp are going to be a lot harder to convince to go back with us now. Hound let out a low sigh, his hand pausing on Coco's head. Yeah, he murmured, figured as much. Doc tilted his head, eyes still on the water. They've been whispering all afternoon, saying we're dangerous, that we're a threat to the kids, that Shane should make us leave before we do something worse. Rick's been trying to calm him down, but a broken bar. He gave a slight shrug as if saying, what can you do? You know how people are, louder ones get heard while quiet ones stay silent. Hound didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at Coco, then at Daisy. His hand moved slowly over the dog's thick fur, thoughtful. I know for a fact, he said at last, that neither of us give a damn what they think. Doc hummed in agreement, amused. That's true. He reached into his pocket and handed Hound a piece of paper. Hawk wants you to scout the woods, look for any walkers or threats to the camp. And him? Hound asked while taking the paper. He's gonna talk to Rick, offer him and anyone willing to listen to come with us back to base. Hopefully they accept our offer. But if they don't? Doc shrugged again. We'll grab some walkers and take care of them anyway. There was a long pause between them. The sun had almost dipped below the tree line now, casting long orange fingers across the lake. Doc stood up slowly, brushing grass from his coat. You gonna be alright out here? Han nodded, confident. Yeah. Doc gave a soft pat to his shoulder. I'll let you off easy this once, but next time you break the rules of dibs, I'm kicking you in the balls. A short chuckle slipped from beneath the mask, dry and sharp. No promises. Doc offered a lazy two-finger salute and turned, walking back toward the camp, the sound of his footsteps slowly fading into the trees. Hound remained where he was, hand resting on Coco. Daisy huffed softly beside him, ears flicking. He looked down at the folded paper curiously, wondering why Doc gave it to him. Hound unfolded the paper. At first, he expected coordinates, patrol routes, maybe a quick sketch of potential walker trails or a scavenging route. But what met his eyes made him pause. The letter was written in uneven, bubbly handwriting, the kind only a child could manage. Crayon scrawls of blue and pink danced across the top. Thank you for protecting me and Carl. You and Coco are really cool. Your mask looks like a dragon. Dragons protect people, right? 11A Sophia. Beneath the words, she had drawn a picture. A small stick figure with blonde hair holding a doll, herself, stood between two taller figures. One was clearly Hound, distinguishable by a massive, exaggerated dragon skull on his head. Beside him was Coco, drawn with 4 oversized paws and a lolling tongue the size of her head. In front of them loomed a big, scribbled monster. Red eyes, gaudy hands, ugly teeth, fat and vague. But Hound and Coco stood between it and the kids, their arms and paws stretched protectively wide. Carl was there too, shorter, with a sheriff's hat far too big for his little stick head. Hound stared at the drawing for a long moment. The crayon lines, the crooked letters, and the childish boldness in how she'd drawn him like a guardian out of a storybook. A faint breath escaped him, a sound that might have been a chuckle, might have been a laugh. The closest thing to a real smile he'd shown all day pulled at the corner of his mouth behind the mask. He folded the letter carefully, creasing the edges with a gentleness he rarely used, and without a word, he tucked it into his inner coat pocket, close to the heart. The dragon mask turned back to the lake, and for a while longer, Hound sat there in silence. Coco nuzzled his side, sensing the shift in his mood to be a happier one. The fire crackled and burned, casting flickering orange light across the circle of weary faces gathered around it. Smoke drifted lazily into the darkening air, carrying with it the scent of sizzling meat, roasted corn, and something vaguely sweet. It was the best meal they'd had in weeks. Laughter echoed around the camp, small, cautious at first, but growing with each passing minute. Rick sat with his family near the edge of the firelight, a warm plate in his hands, and Carl curled up beside him, wearing his hat, chewing happily on a piece of chicken like he hadn't eaten in days. He probably hadn't, not properly, none of them had. But tonight, for a few precious hours, it almost felt normal, almost. Lori sat on the other side of him, legs tucked up under her, picking at her plate. Her shoulders were tense despite the warmth of the fire. Rick caught it immediately. "A broken bar you haven't touched much," he said softly, nudging her with his elbow. She glanced at him, offering a small, tight smile. "I'm fine." Rick didn't push right away. He gave it a minute. Then he leaned in closer, his voice quiet enough not to carry. "It's about them, isn't it?" Too. Lori looked at him now. Really looked. "You brought 3 armed men in masks into our camp, Rick." He held her gaze, steady. "And they saved my life more than once. They earned my trust." Her frown deepened, worry creasing her brow. "That doesn't mean they're not dangerous. You saw what happened earlier. One of them almost gutted a man right in front of the kids." "He didn't," he defended immediately. He stopped himself, "and from what I've been hearing around camp, the man deserved more than just a broken jaw. He had a knife out, Rick." "I've had a gun out before," Rick replied calmly. "Doesn't mean I shot someone." Her eyes dropped to the fire again, the reflection of it danced in her eyes, and for a moment, she looked impossibly tired. "I just a broken bar. I don't know, Rick," she said finally. "I don't like the way they look at the others around the camp, especially with those awful masks." "I'd be dead without them," the former sheriff tried to reason, wanting her to see what he saw. "Lori, they're good people, you have to trust me on this. They got supplies, food, houses, a community, and they are willing to let us be part of it." Lori's lips pressed into a thin line. "And what do they want in return?" Rick hesitated. "A broken bar. Nothing," he said truthfully. "They haven't asked for a damn thing, they just want to help." That, more than anything, seemed to unsettle her. "I don't trust anyone who gives something for nothing," his wife muttered. "Then trust in me," he sighed quietly. "I promise that I will never put you or Carl in danger." 5 Lori didn't answer, but she didn't argue again, either. She simply leaned into his side, resting her head against his shoulder. As the fire crackled on, and he rested his head on hers, none the wiser to the hurt and anger-filled eyes on them from across the fire. They stayed like that for what felt like hours, but stopped when they became aware of the sound of laughter slowly beginning to fade. It was subtle at first, a few chuckles dying off, a voice trailing mid-sentence, but then the shift became unmistakable. The mood changed. Like a cold wind had blown through the campfire, stealing away the warmth. Rick looked up just in time to see Hawk walking out of the darkness, mask gleaming faintly in the firelight, his footsteps light but deliberate. He didn't say a word as he approached, but his presence alone was enough to draw every eye. Conversations died on tongues. Rick stood slowly, instinct prickling at the back of his neck as he looked at the masked man with concern. Lori did the same beside him, Worry, Hawk, Rick said, trying to cut through the silence. Something wrong? Hawk stopped a few feet from the fire, just close enough to let the light hit his mask. Yes. His voice was calm. This place isn't safe. A murmur rippled through the camp. Rick blinked, confused. Kamagaya ? What exactly do you mean by that? Shane asked, glaring at Hawk heatedly at what he was implying. Hawk turned his head slightly, addressing not just Rick now, but everyone within earshot, which, given how quiet the camp had gotten, was damn near everyone. Well, except for Ed, who was currently passed out inside his tent with a broken jaw. This camp is too exposed, Hawk explained, loud enough for everyone to hear, crossing his arms. It's too spread out, supplies are unguarded, tents are scattered, and the perimeter has blind spots. If a herd comes from the east, you won't have time to escape. If bandits find you, you'll lose half your people before you can rally. A few faces turned toward each other, uneasy. Dale furrowed his brow, thinking about the truth behind his words. Andrea sat up straighter while hugging her sister protectively, who was unconsciously nodding along. How long have you been sitting on that? Glenn asked, putting his empty plate down. Noticed it the moment we got here, Hawk said without flinching. Didn't say anything at first because it wasn't our call. Shane stepped forward, his voice tense. And now it is? No, Hawk said. But we're giving you a choice. He paused, letting his words settle like dust in the firelight. There's a place, secure, fortified, and guarded. We have housing, water, enough food for everyone, and medicine. We even have a school for your kids. It's not perfect, far from it, but it's real, and it's growing. And we are more than happy to accept any of you who are willing to join us. Silence. Every face stared at him now, lit by fire and suspicion. That sound like bullshit, someone muttered, not at all believing anything he said. Sounds like a trap, another added, agreeing with them. But not all eyes were hostile. There were flickers of something else in those who wanted more than to just survive. Hope. Rick saw it in Glenn's wide smile, in Carol's pale, exhausted face as she looked at her daughter, in Jackie's careful stillness while her eyes lit up. Even Laurie, sitting beside him, seemed unsure now. Hawk didn't try to convince them with flowery words or promises. He just looked at them all and told it to them straight. We're heading back in 4 days, make up your minds by then. And with that, he turned and walked away, leaving nothing behind but the weight of his offer. The camp was split between refusing and those who accepted their offer. Rick could feel Shane's glare on him, as if he was blaming him for what happened. Merle laughed, having heard everything while he was out taking a piss. Well, looks like we have a reason to stick with these fuckers after all. Merle swaggered back toward his tent, boots scrunching over dry leaves, a crooked grin plastered across his face. Well, shit. He had come back from taking a piss behind the tree line just in time to hear the masked freak's little speech, and boy, wasn't that a game changer. A community, fortified, food, drugs, a goddamn school ? Too. He had originally pegged these people as easy marks, bleeding hearts, and sheep just waiting to be sheared. His original plan was simple: wait until they let their guard down, swipe whatever was worth taking, grab Daryl, and vanish into the woods before anyone knew what hit him. But now he had a reason to stay. Robbing them of canned beans and old blankets seemed downright stupid when there was a whole damn community full of supplies waiting just beyond the forest. Merle's grin widened as he ran a hand down his face, practically buzzing with the possibilities. A real base, with hot food, walls, maybe even a working shower? Hell, he might even find himself a proper bed for once. And if those masked freaks were the kind that knew how to fight and didn't flinch at blood, even better. They make perfect meat shields. He reached the edge of camp, where his tent was located, just as he spotted movement up the trail. His grin returned in full when he saw the source. Daryl, shirt clinging with sweat and face dusted in dirt, was trudging back from the woods with a freshly killed deer dragging over his shoulders, the antlers scraping against the bark of passing trees. Merle let out a low whistle. Well, I'll be damned, baby brother, he drawled, stepping into Daryl's path. Look at you, bringing home the bacon. Daryl frowned, shifting the weight of the carcass and narrowing his eyes. "Why are you smiling like that?" Merle chuckled and tossed an arm around Daryl's shoulders, minding the deer. "Just thinking about our future, little brother, big things on the horizon." Daryl jerked his shoulder free, suspicious. "What the hell you on about?" Merle just winked. "Let's just say we might be trading up. No more tents, no more scraps. Real beds and real walls. Hell, maybe even some hot water." Daryl stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Merle clapped him on the back, grin still riding high. "Stick with me, baby brother. We might just come out of this world sitting pretty." Clementine stared down at her silent radio, a sad look in her eyes. She was by herself, alone in the room, wanting to be alone with her thoughts. She knew it was hopeless to believe her parents were still alive via broken bar, but she couldn't help but hope that they were still out there, somewhere, still alive, still surviving just like her. At least life was better now. Thanks to Leo and his group, she was no longer starving and felt more energized than she had in weeks. Her thoughts turned to her own group, and a smile slowly appeared on her lips. Lee was getting better, his face slowly regaining the healthy color they used to have, thank God. Kenny and Katja had stopped fighting as much now that food and safety were no longer constant threats. The tension that used to hang between them like a storm cloud had begun to lift, replaced by something peaceful. Duck, who she considers to be her overly energetic, dumb little brother, was back to his old self, which was a huge relief. She was beginning to worry about how quiet he was. She tensed when she heard the sound of knocking on her door, but relaxed when she heard Duck's voice. "Hey, Clem. Ghost gave me this really cool game called Uno. Wanna play it with me and Leo?" She smiled at his invitation and was about to say yes, but stopped when she heard Leo's voice. "Duck." Leo's voice came from just down the hall as he rushed over, panicked and hissing like he was trying really hard to whisper yell. "I told you not to mention me when inviting her." "Huh?" Duck blinked, genuinely confused. "Why?" "Because," Leo whispered, sounding like he was halfway to dying of embarrassment. "Because it's we talked about this." "But why?" "It's just the younger boy asked in confusion. "Exactly, it's just Now she's gonna think him a click." The door opened. Leo froze mid-sentence. Standing in the doorway was Clementine, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corners of her lips. She arched her brow teasingly. "Gonna think you're what?" Leo blinked. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish trying to breathe air. Duck looked back and forth between them with an innocent shrug. "I don't get it." Clementine let out a small laugh and leaned against the doorframe, eyes soft. "You're such a dork." Leo groaned and buried his face in his hands. "Please forget this entire interaction." "Not a chance," she grinned, stepping out of the room and giving him a light nudge on the shoulder. "Come on, dork, let's go play some Uno." Duck pumped his fists in victory. "Yes, I call dibs on the red cards." "That's not how the game works." Duck / "That's not how the game works, Duck." "How did this happen?" Leo asked himself while putting down a red 4. "You tell me, this was your idea," Ghost sarcastically said, putting down a wild card and turning it yellow. It started off well enough with just Leo, Clementine, and Duck enjoying the game. And he would like to say he was absolutely kicking ass getting down to 3 cards with ease. But then Clementine, being the sore loser she is, said that was played with 4 people, not just 3, and invited Lily, who just happened to pass by, to join them. He suddenly went from 3 to 10. Much to Clementine's satisfaction. Then Duck, who was having the time of his life, got carried away by his mother and father, who told him it was time for him to take a bath. The boy went kicking and screaming. Then Lily invited Ghost over, who also happened to be passing by. "Which brings us to now. 1 Clementine called out, waving her card up proudly. Ghost got shipped. Lily went next, waving her own card as well. "A broken bar shit," they said at the same time, looking down at their own cards. 5 for Leo, 7 for Ghost. Leo stared up at Ghost, who was in front of him, and asked the question they were both thinking. "Team up?" The reply was instant. "Team up." They weren't competitive, they just didn't like losing. 3 So, how's the packing going? Clementine asked the older woman, acting as if she wasn't smug about currently winning. "We're unpacking and loading everything. Right now we're just waiting for the RV to get fixed up, and we'll be ready to go," she answered, hiding her card protectively from wondering eyes. "How long would that take?" Clem looked over to Leo, who felt her gaze and turned to look at her with a glare. "Yes, how long, Ghost Tilda?" The woman looked at Ghost with a smile. "Soon." Hearing his answer, she turned towards Clementine, completely serious. "Soon." That got a laugh from the younger girl. Leo put down a drawer 4, cutting her laugh off instantly. Clementine narrowed her eyes on the card. "You," she muttered, glaring at Leo. "Wow," he said, feigning offense as he leaned back and fanned his cards like a villain in a cartoon. So much hostility from someone who was just laughing a second ago. Ghost, grinning beneath their mask, dropped a skip card. "And now it's my turn." "No, wait," Lily protested, her smile fading as Leo slapped down another card. "Draw 2." Clementine groaned as she reached for the deck, pulling her punishment while accusing them. "You two are working together." Leo gave her a sly look. "That's what we call synergy." "Or desperation," Lily added, elbowing Clementine gently as the two of them shared a look that clearly said, "We're not going down without a fight." "You know," Ghost said conversationally as they placed a green 9 on the pile, "this is probably the most intense game of Uno I've ever played." "That's because she becomes a card shark with a vendetta if she starts losing." He pointed at her, smirking. "I do not," Clem protested, right before she slapped down a skip card. "Lily, your turn." Leo stared in disbelief. "Did you just skip me?" "Oh, I'm sorry," Clem said sweetly. "Was it your turn, dork?" "All right, that's it." Leo grinned and pointed at Ghost. "Lock in." One Ghost gave a solemn nod, raising their hand like a general issuing a command. They put down a few more cards until the game once again became even. "Your move, Clem," Leo said smugly, eyes gleaming. Clementine, undeterred, placed a blue 2. "Wipe the floor with them." Gladly, Lily played a wild card. "Yellow." Leo blinked, his hands made mostly of blue, and then looked at Ghost, who was just as devastated as he was. "Wait, what? Where did the blue go?" Clementine snorted. Ghost drew a card, silent and solemn, like someone waiting for reinforcements to arrive. Then they drew another, and another. 6 cards later. "A broken bar, you good?" Clementine asked, raising an eyebrow, and the masked man let out a long sigh while clutching his 10 cards. Ghost held up a hand, still drawing. "Yeah, broken bar. I'm re-evaluating my life choices." Leo leaned over to peek. "You just drew 6 in a row." 7. Ghost sighed while hiding his cards from himself. Leo winced in sympathy. As the cards shuffled and the friendly competition simmered, a small lull settled over the group, just long enough for Clementine's voice to break the tension. "How are the others who voted against getting a broken bar doing?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Lily didn't answer right away. She stared at her cards for a moment, then let out a long, tired sigh. "My dad's a broken bar, not taking it well," she admitted quietly. "He's been in his room since the vote. Only comes out to eat. Won't talk to anyone or even me. He just sits there and glares like the whole world betrayed him." Ghost glanced at her briefly, but said nothing, sliding a card onto the pile in silence. "Mark and Carly are still unsure," Lily went on, drawing a card and not even looking at it. "But at least they're not being difficult about it. They're a broken bar, hesitant, but not hostile." "That's something," Clementine offered softly, placing a card down with less flourish than before. "At least they're not arguing back and forth and getting nowhere." Lily let out a small chuckle, the kind that came from being tired more than amused. "No progress, no peace," Leo said absently, examining his cards. "Just a loop of yelling and blaming." They nodded at his words, agreeing with him. "I just a broken bar," Lily trailed off, eyes drifting toward the RV outside the window. "I want us to be strong, to survive, but every choice seems to split us a little more." "You're doing the best you can," Clementine said gently, reaching out to give Lily's arm a small squeeze. "You're trying to hold our group together, that's not easy." Lily looked at her, and something in her expression softened. The leader melted away for a second, leaving just a tired daughter who missed her dad and hated feeling like the bad guy. "Thanks, Clem," she said quietly. And you're right, if all the group ever did was fight and argue, we'd never get anywhere. Rick found himself standing toe-to-toe with Shane just beyond the edge of camp. Birdsong filled the air, but it couldn't drown out the arguing of voices rising between them, or the tension that crackled like a live wire. They've been at it for what felt like hours now, with Rick trying to convince Shane and Shane resisting. And they weren't the only ones arguing. The entire camp was doing the same. I'm telling you, Rick said, jaw tight, hands gesturing emphatically. They're offering us a chance for something better. Do you really wanna pass that up? Shane crossed his arms, his stance firm and expression hard. And I'm telling you, he shot back, you're been Natilda Macronv. Rick frowned as he stopped walking. Natilda Macronv. Shane took a step closer, eyes flashing with disbelief. You trust a bunch of armed men in masks? You even hear yourself, Rick? We don't know who the hell they are, and we don't know what they want. They brought me back to my family, Shane. Rick snapped. Sure, Shane sneered, voice dripping with sarcasm, real noble, but they still wear those freaky-ass masks, don't they? Not to mention the fucking fact they haven't told us what they want from us. Rick's jaw clenched, but he didn't look away. They have their reasons. Besides, why does it matter if they wear masks? That doesn't mean they're bad people, or maybe they wear them because they have something to hide. Shane growled. You ever thought of that? 5 Rick looked away for a second, hands clenched into a tight fist. His thoughts drifted to Leo, the boy with a face littered by scars and the bone-deep exhaustion flickering behind his eyes. The kid wore the look of someone who'd walked through fire and somehow came out the other side still carrying a smile in defiance of everything that had tried to break him. He met Shane's gaze again, glaring with steel. I think they've seen more shit than we can imagine, and maybe they're hiding behind those masks because it's the only way they know how to keep going. Shane sighed and shook his head. It's a risk, Rick. A big one, and I'm not gonna gamble with people's lives just because some guy in a mask says he's got a better place. Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice so only Shane could hear. Then don't do it for him. Do it for the kids, the people who are hanging on by a thread out there, for Carl and Lori. Shane didn't answer. He just stood there, arms crossed, jaw tight, staring past Rick at the camp behind him. A broken bar. Do you really believe that they're serious about helping us? He finally asked, rubbing the back of his head before walking off again. Rick sighed, seeing the long battle he had ahead of him. At least he had 3 more days to convince him. They are some of the most serious people I have ever met. The music blasted throughout the neighborhood through speakers mounted on the roof of a truck. The beat bouncing off empty houses and echoing through the streets like a war drum made of lyrics. Usually, people would try to make as little noise as possible during these trying times, where corpses walked and tried to eat the living, where making too much noise would mean death, where a single bite could turn you into one of them. A broken bar usually. Come and get your love, Tilda. Leo moved through the neighborhood like a predator on a hunt, his dragon mask covered in blood. He was surrounded by lifeless corpses and walkers, with more coming. His coat whipped behind him as he sprinted forward, swinging a 2-handed hammer axe clean through the head of an oncoming walker. Bone split, teeth clattered to the pavement, and the body crumpled. Another walker rushed from his side. Leo didn't bother to turn. Crack. An arrow came from above, and the walker's skull and brain matter sprayed across the driveway. Archer gave a 2-fingered wave from the ledge of the building he was on, before turning in another direction and loading his crossbow again. Come and get your love. 3 more walkers groaned and growled their way towards him, making him take a deep breath before a wide, powerful swing sliced through 3 rotting heads at once. That would make it 42 kills for the day. Gotta say, Shield muttered as he calmly walked up to him while cleaning his shield of guts, this is easily the dumbest and the most effective idea you've ever had. Leo, panting from how long they've been at it, just gave a grin behind the mask. That's what I'm known for. Their group of clones and people who were willing to help were spread out, clearing other areas of the neighborhood, using the same tactic. East is good, Butcher called over the comms. I count 35 down, 8 more on approach. We're thinning the herd. West is clear. No more of them are showing up, Snake chimed in. Cleaning up now. 3 Good progress is being made, guys. 2 more hours and we can head home and enjoy a nice warm meal." Leo encouraged, getting a shout of joy from his people. 5 more walkers made themselves known while he was talking. "Come and get your loot." Leo ducked under a swiping arm, pivoted low, and drove his hammer axe into the base of the walker's skull. He didn't linger. He kicked away the walker he had just killed and swung his weapon down on another 2. Shield had his back, his shield bashing the heads of the walking corpses into paste with ease. More groans answered the noise they were making. More were coming as time went on. But that was fine. That was the point. They were pulling walkers away from the vulnerable perimeter of their community, the same way a magician uses sleight of hand with noise, movement, and confusion, all to keep the real trick hidden. Leo pressed a hand to his comms. "All units disengage in 10 and regroup at Outpost Echo." The response was a chorus of affirmatives. He turned just in time to see the last of the small herd following the sound trail left by the music, all of them shuffling further from the direction of their home. And standing in the street, Leo watched them charge at him, the wind tugging gently at the hem of his coat. His mask didn't smile, but underneath, he did. "This should be enough," he muttered as he grabbed hold of the walker by the back of the neck just as it was about to bite him and slammed it into a car. Behind him, the song hit its final note. "Come and get your lovey," a broken bar, and with one final walker dropping to its knees in the distance by an arrow, silence returned to the neighborhood. But it was the right kind of silence. The kind that meant, for a couple of days at least, everyone back home was safe from walkers. Letting out a tired breath, he flicked his hammer axe to get rid of the blood dripping from it. "Leo," a voice called out to him, causing him to turn towards where it came from. It came from a guy near his age, if not a year or 2 older. He had light blonde hair, thick black glasses, and freckles on his face. It was Freddy, one of the newer people his guys saved from getting trapped in a warehouse with a group of walkers. He was also one of the few people whom he considered to be a best friend. "I just killed 6 walkers by myself. That has to be enough to earn me the mask." He was smiling wildly, full of pride. 6 Leo smirked and was about to respond when he was cut off by someone else. "Calm down, son. And don't exaggerate your numbers. Most of your kills are thanks to me." Freddy's father, Marcus, patted his son on the head with a cheeky smile. Leo couldn't help it. He barked out a laugh, a deep, genuine sound that echoed off the cars and blood-stained pavement. "You really think killing 6 walkers gets you the mask?" he asked, slinging his hammer axe over his shoulder as he approached. "Come on, Freddy, it takes more than that." Marcus grinned and gave his son a pat on the head. "Told you." Freddy, not missing a beat, puffed his chest out, not willing to give up. Okay, then what does it take? I mean, really, how do I earn one?" Leo stopped in front of him, resting the hammer axe against the ground with a low metallic thud. He tilted his head, considering. "You've gotta beat one of my guys," he said simply before shrugging. "Or me. 1-on-1, no help, no crying when you get your nose broken. Then you gotta complete a series of challenges, scavenging runs, stealth operations, and walker lures. We don't hand these masks out for style points, Fred. You earn them by proving you can carry the weight." Freddy's eyes went wide. "Wait, beat you?" Before Leo could answer, Freddy raised a hand and pointed at him like he'd just found the shortcut through life. "Then I challenge you." "Right now." Leo blinked once, then laughed again, even harder this time. Marcus groaned and dragged a hand down his face. "Jesus Christ, Fred, your broken bar." A firm slap landed on the back of Freddy's head. "Ow!" "What the hell, Dad?" "Boy," Marcus said, rubbing his temples like he suddenly aged 10 years. "Did you miss the part where he's swinging a goddamn hammer axe with one hand like it's made of plastic?" Freddy rubbed the back of his head, still defiant. "So?" "I've been working out." Leo just leaned against a nearby truck, clearly entertained. "I like the spirit, but if you're trying to impress me, maybe try not offering yourself up as a punching bag before you're actually ready." Freddy opened his mouth to argue again, but his father shot him a look. Leo shook his head, still grinning behind the mask. "You wanna earn that mask? Start by surviving weeks of patrols with Butcher. If you're still standing, maybe we'll talk about a light spar." Freddy gulped. The thought of going on patrols with Butcher was too much for him. "A broken bar Butcher scares me," he muttered under his breath, Marcus clapped a hand on his son's shoulder. Good, means you're not completely without survival instincts. As the sun began to rise higher in the sky, Leo glanced back at the street full of walker corpses and blood-soaked pavement. He turned to head out, hammeraxe resting across his shoulders. Come on, he called over his shoulder. Let's get everyone home, we'll let the cleanup crew do their job. And without missing a beat, they followed after him. The trip back was quiet, for the most part. No more walkers, no more shouting or music, just the steady crunch of boots on dirt and pavement as Leo led his people home. The blood was starting to dry on their weapons, their coats, and their boots, but none of them looked too concerned about it. As they walked, other teams began to fall in with them, reconvening after a long day. There were nods exchanged, tired smiles, a few playful shoulder bumps between friends and comrades. All of them carried weapons, while some others pulled small carts with salvaged supplies or buckets of water from a nearby creek. They got back into their vehicles they arrived in, and began driving back. Rows of cars slowly followed each other back to their base. It wasn't long before the sound of shovels striking dirt reached their ears. Then the walls came into view, or rather, what would be the walls. The barricades weren't finished yet, wooden frames and bricks still not high enough to be called a proper wall, but it was a start. Just outside the makeshift gate, a group of workers were still digging a deep trench, sweat shining on their backs, voices low as they coordinated shifts. They parked their cars in their designated area and got out with sighs of relief. Inside, it was alive. People bustled about, moving like ants in controlled chaos. Some were hauling bricks and reinforcing the west barricade. Others were prepping what little farmland they had, loosening soil, planting seeds. Smoke curled from where cooking fires had already been lit, and the faint scent of stew or something close to it lingered in the air. They stepped past the incomplete outer wall and were immediately spotted. Cheers and cries of relief rang out from the crowd. Dozens of people from family and friends came running to greet the returning squads. Arms wrapped around each other, people breathing out in relief, gripping hands tightly like they feared letting go would make them disappear again. His men moved out, their duty not yet over, and left him by himself. Leo slowed as he watched it all unfold. One woman threw her arms around her husband and kissed him on the lips. A man dropped his shovel and sprinted across the clearing to embrace his brother. A little girl ran to her father with a bright, innocent smile and hugged his legs. Behind the dragon mask, his smile was small, bitter, and tired. He was happy for them, truly, but it made the pain in his chest ache just a little more. He had no one to run to. No warm arms waiting to embrace him, just the ever-growing list of things that needed to be done. Leo! His head turned toward the familiar voice. Morgan stood a few feet away, beaming like the sun had finally come up just for him. His sleeves were rolled to his elbows, hands still dirty with soil. Behind him stood Jenny and Dwayne, also in patched-up work clothes, holding farming tools. Dwayne raised a fist, grinning for a fist bump. Jenny smiled warmly. You're late for lunch, sweetie. Leo stared for a second, that old ache spiking before fading just slightly. His tired smile curled into something a bit more real. 3 He walked forward towards them and gave the younger boy his much-desired fist bump. Morgan stepped in and pulled him into a rough hug, clapping him once on the back. Good job out there, he said with quiet sincerity. You brought 'em all home again. Leo returned the hug briefly, then pulled back with a grunt. Some of 'em did more heavy lifting than me, but thanks. Jenny stepped forward and gently dusted some dried blood off his shoulder. You stink, she teased, affection in her voice. But we're still glad you're back. Leo chuckled, the sound quiet but genuine. Yeah, he murmured, glancing around at the people reuniting, laughing, rebuilding. A broken bar, me too. What are they doing? Clementine asked, eyes wide as she stared through the broken blinds. Leo glanced over from where he stood at the makeshift counter, saw stained fingers pausing mid-motion above a pepperoni slice. Seeing what she saw, he shrugged nonchalantly. Just some light sparring to make sure they don't get rusty, he said, completely serious. Clementine blinked at him as she heard one of Leo's guys get slammed into an old picnic table with enough force to snap it in half. A broken bar, you call that light? Leo shrugged, eyes back on the dough he was shaping. Could have been the cars. I call that progress. Clementine gave him a look, then slowly turned her head again just in time to see two masked figures punch each other with bone-rattling force. One of them was quicker to recover as they flipped the other over their shoulder and pinned them, fast and brutal. A broken bar, and you're going to do that too? She asked, a worried look appearing on her face. You're not right. Leo chuckled, tossing some shredded cheese onto the pizza with casual confidence. What? And let those guys get cocky. Gotta remind them who's boss. I'm pretty sure it's the other way around, she muttered, wincing as the one pinned got out of the hold and gut-punched the other man. I'll have you know, I aim for the testicles. Clementine narrowed her eyes, trying not to laugh at what he said. You're a menace. And yet here you are helping the menace make pizza. She rolled her eyes but couldn't hold back the smile forming on her lips. Only because said menace promised me extra cheese. Leo smirked, turning away from her. Don't forget the stuffed crust. You spoil me, don't get used to it. This is only because it's a special occasion that we got out the good stuff. At the reminder of what tomorrow meant, her smile faded just a touch. Can't believe we're really leaving this place here. Broken bar. Leo's hands slowed, and he glanced toward her. Kind of weird, huh? After spending so much time here and thinking you'll never leave. He smiled while wiping his hands on a rag. She nodded, brushing a loose curl behind her ear as she took a look around the motel for what could possibly be the last time. It wasn't much, but this place was ours and it kept her safe all this time. The blue-eyed boy was quiet for a moment, understanding what she was going through. He nudged her gently with his shoulder. Well, don't worry. You'll still have terrible wallpaper and occasional bugs where we're going, just upgraded with plumbing and actual food. Clementine let out a giggle and playfully bumped him back. Sounds like paradise. He grinned, his tone softening. You'll see. She nodded again, a little more sure this time, and then pointed to the pizza in progress. You missed a spot. The boy followed her finger, then squinted, frowning. You sure? She nodded solemnly. If a bite doesn't have at least 3 pepperonis, I'm revolting. He chuckled and handed her the pepperoni bag. You're a tyrant. I learned from the best, she said sweetly, before sticking her tongue out at him and dropping the final pieces in place. Now all they had to do was cook the pizzas they made and have a good time for the last time at this motel. Ghost groaned, rolling his shoulders as he sat against the hood of their Hummer, the ache settling in like an old friend. Sure, they were tougher than normal people, but that doesn't mean they don't feel pain when getting flipped onto a table and breaking it. Damn, he muttered, the pain slowly fading away. That roundhouse came out and now a broken bar. A shadow fell over him, causing him to look up to see Lily approaching with a water bottle in hand. She had that same half-concerned, half-impressed look she always wore after watching them spar. You all right? She asked, offering him the bottle. You took one hell of a beating. Ghost gave a tired grin and took the bottle with a grateful nod. If I say no, do I get out of cleanup duty? Lily giggled, knowing just how much he hated doing the cleanup. It wasn't her fault that he and his group agreed to help them with their chores. Not a chance. He chuckled at her answer, then winced at the pain it caused. Thought so. She sat down beside him, close enough to show support but not crowding him. I've seen you take hits before, but that one looked personal. That's 'cause it was, Ghost muttered, tilting the bottle up for a drink. Lily held her breath as he slowly pulled his mask up, never having seen his face before, despite it being days. Her eyes were completely focused on him, not wanting to miss seeing what he looked like under the mazza shatter. She barely saw skin before the sound of breaking glass snapped her attention away. She quickly relaxed when she saw it was just one of Ghost's men practicing with their slingshots using glass bottles as targets. Seeing that it wasn't anything to worry about, she quickly turned around and frowned when she saw him putting the cap back on the bottle. That was Cypher. He still saw that I beat him in last week. Guess this was his version of a rematch. Ghost nodded his head towards the person, not going for another sip. One she sighed in disappointment before turning to stare at this Cypher, who was the one practicing with their slingshot. "Tell him not to be such a sore loser." "Oh, I plan to, right after I slam his head into the dirt tomorrow." She laughed at that, short but genuine. Then, her gaze softened as she looked at him. "Still, maybe don't push yourself so hard, yeah? You're not indestructible as far as I'm aware." Ghost looked at her, surprised by her sincerity. "I'll try." "You better," she said, standing up and offering him a hand with a smile. "Come on, dinner's almost ready," and Clem said something about stuffed crust. "You miss out on that, and I'm not saving you any." Just as Ghost was about to reply, a sharp whistle pierced the air. Both he and Lily turned their heads as one of his masked men jogged toward them, a serious air around him. The man stopped a few feet away, standing at attention. "Ghost," his voice clipped. "We've got something you're gonna want to hear." Ghost's relaxed posture faded in an instant. He stood up with a groan, straightening his back as the weight of leadership settled on his shoulders once more. He looked back at Lily and offered an apologetic nod of his head. "Duty calls," he said with a tired half-smile behind his mask. Lily frowned, getting up as well. "Should I stay with you?" "I could help." He shook his head gently. "Nah, I've got this." "Beauty, it's okay Tilda, go enjoy the pizza." Stuffed crust doesn't come around often in the apocalypse. One she hesitated, clearly tongue, her lips pressed into a worried line, but eventually, she gave a small nod. "I'll write a broken bar. I'll save you a slice if you don't make it to dinner." That was a quick change of heart. "I'll hold you to that," he said, watching her slowly turn and walk back toward the motel with one last glance over her shoulder. Once she was gone, Ghost turned to the scout, the casual warmth in his tone gone like a switch flipping. "Talk." The man didn't waste time. "While we were transporting the people we saved to one of our safe points, we found the school and the street. John's farm." Ghost's whole body tensed at the mention of that name. His fingers curled around the water bottle until the plastic crinkled beneath his grip. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice quiet but hard. 6 The scout nodded before continuing. "We still have guys keeping watch as we speak, and we confirmed the people are still there. Broken bar, whether or not the people at the farm are cannibals yet or already are, we're gonna have to wait and see. 3 Ghost's jaw tightened beneath his mask. For a long second, he didn't say a word, then gave a short nod and turned away. They had work to do before they leave. Carol Peltier sighed quietly as she adjusted the folded stack of laundry in her arms, the fabric still warm from drying in the sun. Her shoes crunched softly on the dirt as she approached her tent, careful not to wake her husband. The flap of the tent stirred as she pulled it aside, slipping inside. Her eyes landed on him immediately. Her husband sprawled out on his side on the makeshift bedding, jaw still wrapped in a tight bandage and stained gauze from when Hound shattered it days ago. His breathing was shallow and slow, and he was still asleep. Good. He'd been quieter since then. Not just because of the broken jaw, it was more than that. Ever since the masked man had knocked him on his ass and sent teeth flying, Ed had changed. The man who once hurled fists and insults at her and her daughter now couldn't meet her gaze, couldn't even raise his voice without choking on it. Sudden movements made him flinch, shadows made him jump, even distant voices sent him curling inward like a beaten dog, bracing for a blow that never came. Carol hadn't expected to feel anything but fear that day, but what she felt watching that mask-covered figure beat the arrogance out of Ed with a brutal punch was something she hadn't expected. It was satisfaction and joy at the sight of her abusive husband getting the karma he deserved. He still tried sometimes, small things, a growl of an insult here, or a point of a finger there, but he shut up real quick when one of the masked men was nearby. And they always were. Sometimes she'd catch a glimpse of them by chance, just standing there broken bar waiting. Carol put down the laundry carefully, folding a shirt belonging to her daughter before glancing toward the back of the tent where Sophia would usually be. "Sophia," she called, voice gentle. "Honey?" No answer. She stepped back outside, looking around the tent for her daughter before squinting toward the small crowd gathered near the communal fire, thinking she would be there. But there was no sign of her. "Sophia," she called again, a little louder now, scanning faces. No reply. Her heart began to beat a little faster as panic slowly began to set in. She walked quickly, asking people as she passed if they had seen her daughter. "I dunno, too busy to notice," came one muttered reply. "Haven't seen her," was another. A shrug as they walked away. "Maybe she's by the water?" Her pace quickened as the air became thicker and harder to breathe. She was just about to fully panic, and was ready to tear open every tent flap in sight, when she heard it. "Can I pet her?" Her daughter's voice. She spun toward where it came from. It came from the horse trailer the masked men used. She hurried over, boots crunching against gravel and dry grass, her pulse thundering. She reached the open back and froze. There was Sophia, gently stroking the muzzle of a brown mare while smiling up at the figure beside her, hound, mask and all, one gloved hand holding out an apple slice for her to give to the horse. His dog was beside them, resting next to the man's feet. The horse whined softly, nuzzling the little girl's hand as she giggled. Han looked down, nodding at something she said, a rare moment of softness in his intimidating presence. Carol didn't speak for a moment. She just stared, chest rising and falling, her panic bleeding into something else. Relief. But beneath all that a broken bar, a cautious uncertainty still lingered. She didn't fully trust them. But in that moment, watching her daughter safe and smiling, Carol Peltier could admit one thing with certainty. She trusted them more than she ever trusted Ed. "Sophia," Carol called, her voice carrying relief and just a touch of leftover panic. The little girl turned at once, wide-eyed. "Mum." Hound turned as well, slow and measured, his mask hiding any expression, though the tilt of his head showed he wasn't caught off guard. Carol made her way over quickly, her hands unconsciously brushing dust from her jeans, heart still slowly settling back into her chest. She stopped just short of them and folded her arms, not quite scolding, but close. "What are you doing over here, sweetheart?" she asked, voice soft but firm. "Didn't I tell you to stay near the camp until I come back?" Sophia's smile faltered, and now a sad look replaced it. "I just a broken bar. I wanted to meet Daisy, and Mr. Hound said I could pet her, and I forgot to tell you." "I didn't mean to scare you." Carol exhaled through her nose, the tension draining out of her shoulders as she knelt down in front of her daughter and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's all right," she murmured. "But next time, let me know before you disappear, okay?" "I nearly tore the whole camp apart looking for you." Sophia nodded quickly, a smile now back on her face. "Okay, I promise." Satisfied, Carol stood back up and turned her gaze to Hound, swallowing her unease as she met the blank stare of his mask. "Thank you," she said hesitantly, voice quiet, "for looking after her." Hound simply gave a nod. "I was just about to ask if she wanted to ride Daisy." Sophia gasped, her eyes lighting up like someone had flipped a switch inside her. "Really?" Carol's eyebrows rose at her daughter's excitement, but before she could respond, Sophia was already bouncing in place, practically vibrating with energy as she turned back to her. "Can I, Mum?" "Please." Carol glanced at the horse, at Hound, and then back at her daughter's eager face. The hesitation was there, still flickering at the edges of her thoughts, but it was hard to hold onto it when her daughter looked that happy. She smiled softly and gave a slow nod. "All right, just be careful when you're on." "Okay sweetie." Sophia squealed in joy and launched forward, wrapping her arms around Carol in a tight hug. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Carol chuckled and ruffled her hair. "Go on then." Her daughter turned immediately to Hound, eyes expectant, her excitement barely contained. Hound let out a quiet chuckle, undeniably amused. He reached for the saddle, putting it on Daisy, and began helping Sophia up with practiced ease, the kind of gentle care that said more than words ever could. Carol stepped back and watched them with careful eyes, but a smile was on her face nonetheless. She quickly followed after them as they began their little stroll. The trail just outside the camp wound through a quiet patch of forest. Sunlight filtered through the branches above, painting beautiful patterns of light on the dirt path below. Birds chirped softly in the distance, the occasional snap of twigs underfoot the only disruption of the nature around them. Carol walked beside them, her steps steady, a hand occasionally brushing leaves out of her way. Hound strode silently at her daughter's side, one hand holding Daisy's reins with the same quiet confidence he seemed to carry into everything as he led them along. The massive brown mare moved with calm, slow steps, careful with the little girl riding atop her back. Sophia swayed slightly with Daisy's rhythm, a wide grin on her face as she looked around with wonder as if she were on top of the world. "Mr. Hound, does Daisy have a favorite snack?" The masked man he glanced up at her with a slight tilt of his head. "Hound is fine and her favorite snack is apples," he said simply. "But only the red ones. Not green?" "She gets fussy if it's green," he replied, as if it was obvious. Sophia giggled, petting Daisy's neck. "She's picky." Carol let out a small breath of amusement, listening quietly as Sophia fired off more questions. "Where did you find her? Does she sleep in the trailer? What's her full name?" "Found her alone at a farm and she's just Daisy," Hound said, calm and patient, answering each question without complaint. "She likes the trailer but prefers to sleep outside, more comfy." They continued like that for a while, the peaceful atmosphere settling over them like a blanket. "Does she like Coco?" "They get along fine as long as I don't play favorites." "How many pets do you have?" "Does a bear count as a pet?" "You have a pet bear?" "We made an agreement when I found him while raiding a zoo. He won't eat me as long as I keep him fed." 6 That's so cool. Even Carol felt the tension in her shoulders loosen, especially at the joke he made about the bear. But eventually, the questions dwindled, and silence took root between them again, soft and not unwelcome. That was when Carol spoke. "How many people decided to go?" she asked quietly from beside them. "To go with you." Hound didn't answer right away. His pace didn't slow, but Carol could see the subtle shift in his posture. "Not many," he finally said. "So far, it's only Glenn, Jackie, maybe Amy if her sister follows, Jim, and T-Dog who are confirmed going." Carol nodded slightly, her eyes on the dirt path beneath her shoes. "Rick's still trying to convince Shane due to him being the one people look to as a leader," Hound added. "The rest are stuck arguing in circles. Today's the last die broken bar and they're still debating." The silence stretched for a few more steps, broken only by the steady clip-clop of Daisy's hooves. Then Hound turned his head slightly, his voice low but clear only to her. "Have you decided?" Carol stopped walking. Her eyes slowly lifted from the trail and met the blank surface of his mask. "I don't know," she said honestly, her voice quiet, almost ashamed. She glanced up at Sophia again, her daughter beaming from horseback, safe and carefree in the way she hadn't been in so long. "I want to," she murmured. "I just a broken bar my husband." She didn't say the rest, but it hung between them like heavy fog. Han gave a slow nod, as if he understood without needing to hear it. They kept walking as the sun slowly began to set. Hawk boots scrunched softly against the forest floor, leaves and twigs giving way beneath each step. He moved through the forest at a steady pace, always scanning the area for threats. Doc walked in quiet tandem, spear slung over his back. "They're still arguing," Hawk muttered, breaking the silence, his voice a rasp behind the mask. Doc didn't look at him as he responded with a sigh. "Of course they are. They'll die that way," Hawk said bitterly, thinking about the kids who were with them, squabbling while the world eats them alive. Doc gave a dry snort, brushing aside a branch. "If the dead don't kill them, their indecision will." A short beat of silence passed between them, filled only by the rustling of wind and branches, until Hawk stopped in his tracks. His hand shot out, catching Doc's shoulder. Both men dropped low, crouched behind a fallen tree. In the distance, a low groan echoed. And then another and another. A slow, steady wave of moaning voices rolled through the trees like a storm building on the horizon. Hawk clicked on the side of his mask and peered through the brush. Walkers. Dozens, no, even more than that. At least 30 of them, slowly shambling through the woods. And to make matters worse, they were heading straight for the camp. "Shit," Hawk muttered, tapping on his mask again. "Think they'll notice before it's too late?" The doctor shook his head before tapping on his own mask. "We both saw how their camp's wide open and how they act like it's completely safe just because they haven't been attacked yet. Most of them look like they have never killed a damn thing, let alone a walker. They won't move until someone's already screaming and dead." A long breath passed before Doc pulled something out from seemingly nowhere beside his head. It was another dragon mask, but unlike the others, this one was stitched from rotting flesh. The leather was mottled with decay, bone showing through one malformed cheek, and symbols painted in blood. "I hate this," Doc muttered, eyeing the mask. "They need a fucking wake-up call," Hawk replied, voice cold. "So we're gonna give them one." Hawk moved swiftly between the trees, eyes sharp beneath the mask. He scanned the horde until he spotted one walker that had drifted too far from the main group, an older corpse in a stained business suit, arms twitching weakly, half its jaw missing. "Perfect." "Got one?" Hawk whispered. Doc nodded and followed without a word. The two of them stalked forward and pounced on the lone walking corpse. Hawk tackled the walker low, slamming it into the ground with a crunch of brittle bone against rock. It squirmed, teeth gnashing, but Hawk planted a knee on its back and locked its hands in a tight hold. "Hold still." Hawk growled like it could understand. Doc brought the mask to his face, the rotting flesh one, stinking of death and old blood. The moment it was on the walker's face, the reaction was immediate. The walker let out an unnatural shriek, like steel being dragged across glass, its limbs trying to flail violently, but Hawk's grip was unbreakable. The corpse's frame convulsed like it was being torn apart from the inside out as it slowly transformed, the mask molding into the walker's face. Then it completely stopped and was now perfectly still. Seeing this, Hawk let go and walked away from the walker while Doc took out another mask. Now free to move, the walker pushed off from the dirt and stood with a slow, deliberate motion. A walker version of Leo stared back at them, his features grotesquely mirrored in this abomination. The same blue eyes, now milky, the same wild hair, only dirty and half falling out, and his face unrecognizable as his jaw hung loosely. Then, without hesitation, Walker Leo raised a rotting hand to his face and ripped it off. He tore out his hair, peeled his skin, then gouged one eye free and let it hang by a strand. Now he was even more unrecognizable. "I hate how we can still feel everything a broken bar," Doc muttered, backing away as the pain was overwhelming. "It's a good thing we're used to it," Hawk grumbled as he walked away and started looking for his next target. Walker Leo growled low and flexed his decaying fingers as if he was testing the body before adjusting his suit. "Come on, we need 10 more," Hawk ordered, already spotting their next target. They moved quickly, getting the job done as fast as possible. Doc grabbed the next stray walker while Hawk held it down and forced the mask on. 3 each time. The screams were just as unnatural every time one rose to its feet. It began mutilating itself in a gruesome show of individuality. Hair torn, eyes ripped out, and flesh peeled from skulls. By the end of it, they had 10 and killed the rest. 10 rotting corpses, each looking unrecognizable to the others. Doc stood, wiping gore off his gloves as he looked around. "That's the last of it." Hawk gave a nod. "Let's scare the dumbasses into surviving." With that said, they turned toward Camp at Broken Bar and let the horrors walk, and if someone named Ed were to be the only one to die ?8 well, that's just bad luck now, wasn't it? Night had settled over the camp like a heavy blanket, thick and suffocating. A dying fire crackled at the center, its orange glow casting long shadows across the worn tents and rusting vehicles that made up the temporary sanctuary. Tomorrow, Hound, Doc, and Hawk would be leaving, taking with them those brave or desperate enough to follow. For now, though, the camp was still. Some sat quietly near the fire, watching embers drift into the dark. Others had already turned in, seeking what little rest they could find. The air was filled with a low murmur of voices still debating, the sound of bugs, and the faint rustle of trees in the wind. Rick Grimes sat a short distance from the flames, facing Shane. The two men had been talking, arguing, really, for hours now. "Shane," Rick said, rubbing his face, his jaw tight, "you can't keep pretending this place is safe." Shane shook his head, eyes narrowed. "And heading off with a bunch of masked men is? That's suicide." "Just fucking trust me on this," Rick snapped back. "They know what they're doing!" "Enough, both of you." Laurie's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. One Rick and Shane turned at once, startled by the sudden interruption. Laurie stood just beyond the firelight, arms folded tight across her chest. Her expression caught somewhere between exhaustion and frustration, having come from tucking her son into bed. "You've been at each other's throats for days," she said, stepping closer, her voice low but sharp. I'm sick of it. Everyone is. Shane's jaw clenched. Lori, don't know. You don't, she snapped, not letting him finish. This isn't helping anyone. We're trying to figure out how to survive, and all you two do is argue like this is some pissing contest! One Rick looked like he wanted to say something, but held back. Shane, on the other hand, wasn't done. So what, you're taking his side now? Shane asked, voice biting, eyes locked on hers like a challenge. But Lori didn't flinch. She met his gaze squarely. I'm not picking sides, Shania broken bar. I'm trusting my husband. She walked towards her husband and sat by his side, and took his hands into hers. Shane looked as if he had just been slapped and spat on. And come tomorrow, Lori continued, her tone final. I'm going with him. For a long beat, no one said anything. Shane just stood there, staring at her, his face hard to read, filled with a mix of shock, disbelief, maybe even betrayal flickering behind his eyes. Lori didn't look away. Shane's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked from Lori to Rick, then back again, jaw tightening as something unreadable twisted in his eyes. They sat in silence, completely unaware of the chaos that was about to happen. A broken bar in one of the darker corners of the camp, far from the rest of the group, Ed Peltier groaned and rolled over in his tent. The painkillers were wearing off as his jaw throbbed with a deep, pulsing ache that clawed through his skull like fire. His mouth was a torn mess behind the bandages, every breath tasting of blood and regret. He angrily tossed aside the pillow he was lying on, the memory of getting punched by that damn bastard still haunting him. It might not be today, hell, it might not be any time soon, but one day, he would make that masked freak pay. The sound of rustling came from outside his tent, and a shadow of a figure flickered. He assumed it was his wife making the noise. He spat something thick into the tent floor, then growled low in his throat. Carol, get me my goddamn meds, he slurred, barely able to speak through the swelling and gauze. When no answer came, his groan turned into a snarl. Carol. Still nothing, but the rustling came again. He heard it now, soft crunching footsteps, dragging across dead leaves. The flap of his tent shifted, and Ed squinted blearily toward it as he angrily got up. You deaf or something? You worthless bitch. I said get me Thea! The flap opened, and his face was inches away from a disgusting corpse. The thing that greeted him was human, but only barely. Its skin was missing, ripped clean off in long sheets, exposing raw, rotting muscle and wet, twitching tendons. Its face was nothing but exposed muscle tissue, a grotesque, ugly skull with hollow sockets and strands of hair still clinging to its scalp like seaweed on a corpse. It growled, a wet and guttural sound that rattled like boiling tar. Ed stopped breathing, and his heart stopped beating as his life flashed before his eyes. For a moment, neither moved as they stared each other down. One was consumed with fear, and the other was unable to show emotion on his skinless face. Ruick. Then the walker lunged with a terrifying speed, letting out an inhuman roar. Ed's ear-piercing scream shattered the quiet night. He stumbled back, falling over himself as clawed hands tore into the tent, painfully grabbing hold of his legs and pulling him out. The fabric ripped like paper as his body was dragged into the dirt, his fingernails clawing at the ground as he thrashed and kicked. Help! Help me! Get tight off me! He desperately screamed out, especially when the walker finally let go and slammed its foot onto his chest. The walker didn't bite. Instead, it seemed to relish the moment, as it pressed down on his chest, its weight unbearable, its soulless eyes glaring down at him. Ed screamed until his throat hurt. Blood dripped from what was left of its jaw as it opened its mouth and unleashed another guttural snarl, hot and putrid against Ed's face. He screamed until his very soul started to scream with him. The smell of piss coming from Ed was strong, but not as strong as the smell of shit. One the creature finally struck, its bony hands sinking straight through his flesh and into his abdomen with a wet crunch that sent blood spraying across the dirt. No! The scream choked off into a strangled gargle as the walker slowly tore into him, ripping open his stomach with jerking, animalistic force. 3. His hands punched weakly against the creature's chest, but it did jack shit. Flesh was torn, bones exposed, intestines ripped out, his screams breaking apart into sobs, gasps, gurgles, and then silence. Guts and blood were spilled out on the dirt beside his body, broken by his death was less than painless. Nearby, the camp was in chaos due to Ed's screams and the inhuman roar. Flashlights cut through the dark while people were screaming and shouting at what the fuck was going on. Rick and Shane were already running toward where the screaming came from. By the time they reached Ed's tent, it was too late. They were met with a truly gruesome sight. Ed was sprawled across the dirt, a hollowed-out mess of meat and blood. The walker stood over him, hands dripping with blood, as it glared down at the lifeless man. Shane stumbled back in horror, gun pointed at the walker. "What the fuck?" Rick's face twisted in shock before turning stone cold, before yelling as loud as he could to warn the others. "Walker!" They both raised their weapons and fired. The walker jerked with each shot, bullets punching into its chest and shoulders. Blood sprayed, but it didn't fall. It turned its head toward them slowly, almost mockingly, chunks of gore still hanging from its hands. Its eyes were empty sockets that somehow stared back at them with malice as it started walking towards them slowly. "What the hell?" Shane shouted, confused as fuck as to why the walker was still standing while unloading his entire clip. Still, it came closer no matter how many bullets he shot into the bastard. It walked toward them, slow, but unstoppable. Rick's heart pounded, just as confused as Shane. But he suddenly remembered Leo's words, nearly slapping himself as he did. Always the aim for the head. He aimed higher this time, one clean shot. Bang! The bullet tore through the walker's skull, and it finally dropped, crumpling like a puppet with its strings cut. They lowered their weapons, breathing hard. But there wasn't time to relax. Screams erupted from the other side of the camp. Walkers! Help! Somebody help! My baby! Then more of them emerged, staggering out from the tree line, from the dark corners between tents, from the shadows behind trees. The camp was in chaos now. Survivors screamed, stumbled, tripped over tents and tangled feet as the grotesque corpses poured in from the dark. Rick! Laurie's fear-filled scream rang out from behind them. Hearing his wife cry for help, Rick immediately rushed to save her, his heart pounding against his chest as he ran with all his might. He just got his family back, goddammit. Laurie! Laurie! Rick and Shane yelled at the same time as they came to the sight of a walker crawling toward her and fellow survivors with a hungry snarl. She was on the ground, desperately trying to crawl away, but failing as she kept screaming at the walker. The others stood there shaking in fear, unable to do anything but watch. The walker was inching closer and closer with each passing second, thrashing and growling at everything and everyone. Rick immediately ran to her and pulled her up into his arms, pulling her to safety. Shane aimed his gun at the walker's head and fired, killing it instantly. "Are you all right? Were you bitten?" Rick frantically asked while checking her over, the fear and worry overwhelming him. "And no, I'm fine. It didn't even touch me," she stuttered out, hurrying her face into his chest, crying. Shane looked at the two of them, gun tight in his hand. The sounds of panic and screaming didn't stop. They only grew louder, spreading across the camp like wildfire. Rick held Laurie tight for another moment, his hand cupping the back of her head, heart still slamming in his chest. But the chaos crashing around them didn't wait. It never did. Another scream rang out from somewhere near the fire pit. This one was younger, higher. Someone else was in danger. Rick's body tensed, his instincts kicking in like a damn war drum. "Laurie!" he snapped, pulling back just enough to look her in the eye. "Go, grab Carl and get to the car, lock yourselves in." Laurie nodded shakily, but her hands were trembling. Rick grabbed her wrist and shoved something cold and metallic into her palm. She looked down at the handgun in her grasp like it was some cursed relic. "Yeah, Rick, I've never just point and shoot the head if anything gets close." "Do not hesitate," he said, voice harder than steel. "This isn't the time to be scared about shooting a gun." Her eyes welled with tears, but she nodded, gripping the gun tightly. "I'll protect him," she whispered. "I know you will," Rick replied as he leaned in, kissed her forehead, then gently pushed her toward the cars. "Go." Laurie turned and ran. Rick didn't wait to see if she made it. He turned to Shane, who was already reloading with a grim expression, jaw clenched like he was chewing nails. "You ready?" Rick asked. Shane clicked the slide back on his pistol and gave him a silent nod. Together, they ran to what was probably the most difficult fight of their lives. The firelight painted the camp in a flickering hellscape, shadows dancing like demons as walkers stumbled through the torn tents and overturned supplies, chasing after the panicking survivors. None the wiser to the three men watching from the top of the trees. "A broken bar, this is sad," Hound grumbled out as he watched a man trip over his own feet and somehow knock himself out while being chased by a Walker Leo. 2. The Walker Leo stared down at the man before looking around and simply started chasing after another camper. 9. Walker versions of themselves were always a pain in the ass to use. It took too much focus and control to make sure the virus doesn't take over and cause an actual bloodshed to happen, not to mention the unbearable pain that would course through them due to their existence. 1. He scratched Coco under the chin, who was currently resting on his shoulders, enjoying a treat. "We have a lot of work to do with this group when we get back," Hawk agreed with a sigh as a woman started throwing random shit at an armless Walker Leo despite there being a perfectly good kitchen knife right next to her. They then watched as Andrea and her sister struggled against a single walker, who had grabbed hold of Amy's arm and simply screamed wildly at them, waiting for one of them to end its misery. "Let go of her, you son of a bitch. Kill it. Just fucking kill it." They were in a tug-of-war of sorts with Andrea and Amy trying to break free and run away instead of simply killing the damn walker. Hawk and Hound perked up when the older sister finally pulled out her gun, but signed when the gun did nothing because the safety was still on, causing the sisters to panic even more. At least some of them are able to protect themselves. They watched as an arrow belonging to Daryl pierced through that Walker Leo's skull, severing the link between them. 7 remaining, sadly enough. Doc said nothing, his attention focused on a lone child frozen in place as the chaos happened around him, with no adult in sight running to take care of him. "All right, we got Ed, and we caused enough trauma, let's put a stop to this," Hawk ordered while looking at his watch. He sighed when he noticed that barely 5 minutes had passed. The chaos tore through the camp like wildfire. Screams echoed through the woods, panicked footsteps crunching leaves as people scrambled for safety. Hound dropped from a tree like a wraith, landing silently on both feet, Coco hopping off his shoulder. He moved fast, faster than most could track in the dark, knife already in his hand as he charged toward the nearest walker. He saw one lurch toward Carol, who was desperately trying to pull her daughter free from a tangled tent flap. He whistled, causing Coco to bolt ahead and bite down on the walker's leg with a rumbling growl, causing the walker to fall face first into the dirt. 10. With a swift arc, Hound stabbed the walker in the head, killing it in one blow. It dropped without a struggle, and the woman gasped in relief as she realized that she and her baby were safe. An arrow pierced through the head of a walker who had cornered Morales and his family, making them turn and spot Hawk a distance away, reloading his crossbow. Doc ran to the kid, picked him up in his arms, and stabbed his spear into a walker that was slowly making its way to him. In the middle of it all, Rick and Shane were firing shot after shot, the darkness making it hard to see who was a walker and who was not. One walker tried to grab Glenn, who was leading a mother and her child away to safety, but Hound's knife split its skull before it could even reach him. Glenn turned, wide-eyed, looking at the tall figure who didn't say a word, just nodded, and kept going. "Holy shit," Glenn whispered under his breath. Thanks. Walkers dropped dead to the forest floor as the men dealt with the walking corpses. The camp was filled with screams and fear, slowly returning back to what it once was. The final walker, a ragged, legless thing crawling across the dirt with only one arm, let out a sickening wheeze as it reached for Andrea, who had fallen backward trying to reload her gun. The woman scrambled to aim, her fingers trembling. The creature's head jerked violently as a crossbow bolt buried itself deep into its skull. Hawk lowered his weapon, gave a subtle nod, then kneeled down to take back his arrow with the silent grace of someone far too used to this. And just like that, a broken bar, it was over. The screams died off, gunfire stopped, and the walkers were no longer a problem as everyone gathered around in their now ruined camp. A heavy, Hollow silence fell over them like a thick fog. Faces pale, eyes wide, bodies trembling. Mothers clutched children, friends leaned on each other, and survivors gathered without speaking. Rick stood near the fire pit, his gun still smoking, eyes scanning what remained of the camp. Tents torn, blood smeared across the ground, rotting corpses littered all around them. He slowly turned to Shane. Shane didn't say a word as he angrily kicked a lifeless walker. The look they shared was brief, but it spoke volumes. Shane's shoulders dropped, his jaw unclenched. The argument was over. He had nothing left to stand on, not after this. All around them, people stared at the three masked men, who were already gathering the now dead walkers into a pile. They had moved like experienced soldiers, efficient and deadly. While others screamed and stumbled, they acted without hesitation. Doc stood silently in the middle of it all, blood on his spear, his coat rustling faintly in the breeze. He gently handed the boy back to his parents as they gratefully thanked him with tears in their eyes. Hound was crouched beside Coco, checking her paws and mouth like none of this had happened. Hawk slung his crossbow over his shoulder and stepped past a group of staring survivors without saying a word. None of them basked in the attention, they didn't even acknowledge it. To them, it was just another job done. Just another night. Rick watched them, then stepped forward. He moved past people who were still catching their breath, past the blood, past the mess. When he reached them, he simply said, "Thank you." They just gave the faintest of nods. That was all. Rick glanced over his shoulder, back toward the survivors. Some were still crying, others were trying to fix the damage to their tents, while some were hugging their loved ones close. The camp, once a place of fragile peace, now felt more like a war zone. But they were alive, and they had those three to thank for it. Holy shit. What did I miss? Everyone turned to where the question came from and found Merle coming out of his tent with a lazy yawn. 5 What? He asked, looking around in confusion. Morning came like a quiet apology. The sun rose slowly over the trees, casting a pale light over the destroyed camp. The smell of blood and ash still lingered in the air, and smoke drifted lazily from the dying remnants of the fire. The bodies of the walkers had long since been burned in a controlled pyre near the edge of camp. Hawk and Hound had made sure of it. Doc was bandaging cuts, checking wounds, and handing out medicine to those who needed it. Now, the survivors moved through the aftermath in a daze, trying not to look too long at the bloodstains still soaking into the dirt. Rick stood near the central fire pit, arms crossed tightly over his chest, jaw set with the kind of tension that didn't go away with sleep. Not that anyone had really slept. Shane approached him from the side, rubbing the back of his head as he let out a tired breath. 2 head counts done, Shane said gruffly, not looking at him at first. Double-checked it with Morales and Jackie. Rick turned to him slowly, silently praying that the number wasn't too high. And Shane let out a long breath and said the last part quietly, like he couldn't quite believe it himself. Just 1. Rick blinked, wondering if he had heard wrong. 1? Shane nodded as he took a deep breath. Only a near broken bar. We lost Ed. 5 A long silence followed as Rick stared into the fire pit, then slowly turned to glance toward the far edge of camp where the man's wife and daughter stood over his dead body. Carol was holding Sophia tightly against her side. The little girl had her arms around her mother's waist, face buried in her shirt, while Carol stared blankly at the body. Her face was unreadable, like the grief wasn't sure where it was supposed to settle. No one approached her. No one said I'm sorry. Not even she seemed sure if she was. Elsewhere in the camp, the atmosphere was strange. People mourned, yes, but not like they had expected to. Not like they would have if it had been more than one person or at least someone other than Ed. A broken bar could have been worse. A broken bar. God, what if it had been one of the kids? A broken bar. If I'm being honest, at least it wasn't anyone that matters. 3 Guilt, relief, and quiet shame were painted on every face. And yet, through all that, the masked men remained apart from the group, like wolves that had wandered into a camp of rabbits, done their work, and stayed only because they hadn't left yet. Rick watched it all. His arms loosened slightly, and he turned to where Lori stood with Cal, trying to comfort him the best she could. He moved toward them and wrapped them all in his arms. Lori leaned her forehead into his shoulder. Carl hugged him tightly. Rick didn't say a word. he just silently held them in his arms and let the adrenaline drain out of his system in silence. After some time has passed with everyone processing what happened last night, they gathered everyone near the center of camp, some still rubbing sleep from their eyes, others looking over their shoulders like the woods would spit out another monster any second. Doc, Hawk, and Hound stood at the back of the crowd, watching silently. Rick stepped forward, taking the lead, his voice steady despite the tension in the air. "This place isn't safe." He let the words hang there as everyone looked towards him, their attention focused on him. "We thought it was a broken bar, we wanted it to be, but last night proved otherwise. If not for them," he gestured to the three masked men, "we'd be digging more than a single grave right now." A solemn silence hung heavily in the air when he said this, because what he said was true. They got lucky this time, but who's to say the same would happen the next time this happens? Shane stepped up beside him, supporting him. "We've been fighting to survive, day by day, but we can't keep doing this, especially now that we know walkers can attack at any moment." Rick nodded, patting him on the back, and continued to the point. "That's why we need to move. We are going with them." Some eyes widened as people instantly looked at the masked men again. Those unreadable masks, the blood still drying on their clothes, the way they hadn't said a single word all morning. "They've offered us something better," Rick said. "A real chance. I know it's scary, and I know some of you still have doubts." He looked around at the crowd, face hard with conviction. "But if you want to live, really live, then pack your things. We leave in 4 hours, with or without you." And with that, the crowd fell into murmurs again. Nervous glances, quiet conversations, but no shouting in objections, no panic, and no argument. Not this time. As people slowly dispersed, packing what little they had, Rick stood in place for a long moment. He turned, looking toward Hound, Hawk, and Doc. Watched as they walked away to do God knows what. The warehouse was full of footsteps and the low hum of makeshift generators powering only what was necessary. Leo stood near the back, hands on his hips, brow furrowed in deep thought as he stared at the half-gutted remains of a helicopter. Its side panel was off, wiring exposed like a cracked open skull, and the rotors had been removed for individual repairs. 2 clones were working nearby, one with a soldering iron and goggles, the other flipping through a wiring schematic, trying to figure it out. A third clone, perched atop a scaffold above, was trying to wrestle a stubborn bolt off the rotor housing with a wrench and a string of curses. Leo squinted up at the rotor mount, chewing a granola bar he hadn't realized had gone stale. "It'll fly," he muttered to himself, his voice full of promise. As if on cue, the lights flickered, and something exploded somewhere in the warehouse. "A broken bar, please let it fly." That was when one of the clones hurried over from the corner of the room holding a handheld radio. "Hey, boss," the clone said, holding it out. "It's Hawk." Leo took the radio with a raised brow, brushing oil off his hands before pressing the button. Static crackled for a moment before Hawk's voice came through, sharp and to the point. "We're coming back." Leo blinked before smiling. "That was fast. Someone wants a promotion." Yeah, laugh it up." Hawk grumbled through the radio. "We're bringing survivors with us, a lot of them." There was a pause before he continued. "We'll need medkits ready and quarantine procedures in place. Expect arrival by nightfall." Leo nodded, even though Hawk couldn't see it. "Got it. I'll start clearing space and prepping supplies." The signal cut out as the conversation ended. He stared at the radio for a moment, then looked up at the helicopter again, then at the clones now glancing toward him for direction. "All right," Leo said, tossing the radio back to the clone. "You two, get Butcher, tell him to prep the south checkpoint and the gate crew." He pointed to the one up on the scaffold. "Get down from there before you fall and break your neck." "I have it," the clone shouted back defensively. "No, you have an accident waiting to happen." "Let's go, people. We've got company coming!" For Chapter 17. Chapter 17. Back at the motel now, You might be asking yourself why the fuck it took me so long to release another chapter. A broken bar work is a bitch. Anyways, leave a comment if you want more. Next update: fuck this cultivation world. Another terrible dream. Another horrific nightmare. A never-ending torture he has experienced for almost all his young life. Nightmares of walking corpses tearing the living apart. Dreams of people he has never met. Of a world in ruin and death. The kind that didn't fade when the morning light crept through the cracks in the window. The kind that burrowed into his soul and made a home there, festering like rot. For 15 years. For 15 long, merciless years, he had suffered through them every time sleep claimed him. A lifetime's worth of terror compressed into fleeting hours of restless sleep. Nightmares that crawled into his mind and planted their claws deep, never letting go. He no longer remembered what a peaceful sleep felt like. If such a thing had ever existed, it was gone now, erased from his reality. It always began the same way. A stillness in the air, as through the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the silence. Not the comforting kind, but a suffocating void, unnatural, absolute. And then it would begin. The screams. Oh God, the screams. They ripped through the stillness like jagged knives, filling the world with agony. Men, women, children, countless voices shrieking for mercy, for help, for salvation. All of it pointless. The nightmare unfolded before him like a hellish play, the scenes etched into his mind in grotesque clarity as he stood between it all, helpless to do anything. He saw burning cities and grumbling streets littered with corpses. He smelled the acrid stench of smoke and blood, choking the air like poison, and in the midst of it all, the walking corpses, shambling, broken, grotesque corpses, rising from the grave, skin hanging in strips from brittle bones, jaws stretched far too wide, eyes glassy and hollow yet burning with mindless hunger. They moved like puppets with tangled strings, limbs jerking and twisting in unnatural rhythms, their rotting mouths gnashing at the air. And the living, hunted, torn apart, devoured alive, screaming, begging, fighting, but dying all the same. It didn't matter if they ran, if they hid, if they fought tooth and nail against fate itself. Death always found them. He saw their faces each night, strangers and friends, people he had never met and those whose names he somehow knew despite having no memory of them. Mothers shielding their children, lovers dying in each other's arms, families shattered before his eyes. And worst of all, he saw himself, alone, always alone, standing there, in the middle of the carnage, his hands stained with blood. He tried to save them. God, he tried, but no matter how fast he ran, how hard he fought, he was always too late. Failure became his shadow, clinging to him like a second skin. But the nightmare never ended with the dead. Just when the horror seemed at its peak, the earth would tremble beneath his feet. The skies would split open like torn flesh, thunder screaming from the heavens. And then it came. A colossal shape, bigger than mountains, rising from the void beyond the sky. A monster. This thing was beyond comprehension, beyond nightmare. Its body stretched endlessly across the horizon, scales like blackened steel, wings blotting out the stars. And its heads twisted and turned in the sky. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Hundreds of snarling, twisting dragon-like heads, each one a grotesque reflection of wrath and hunger. Their eyes burned with power, mouths dripping with smoke and molten flame. They turned toward him, those countless heads glaring down at him as if he were a mere ant, and in that moment, he knew true insignificance. The monster opened its jaws with a deafening roar that shattered the world. A tidal wave of teeth and fire consumed everything in its path, corpses and living alike. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He screamed, but no sound left his throat. The last thing he ever saw was that endless maw swallowing him whole. The darkness consumed him. And then a broken bar he woke up, gasping, choking, drenched in cold sweat. The world around him was still, dark, and silent, but his heart was racing like a trapped animal in his chest. His lungs burned as if he had truly been devoured, crushed beneath the weight of that monstrous being. But worse than the terror was the feeling, that suffocating sensation, as if something was wrapped around his face. His hands shot up instinctively, clawing at his skin, grasping wildly at his cheeks and eyes. His fingers scraped against his face, searching for it, that thing, something cold and suffocating that wasn't really there. But his face was bare. It always was. And yet every time he woke, the sensation lingered. A phantom mask, cold and heavy, pressed against his skin as though some cruel force had tried to bind him to that nightmare forever. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he curled forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his trembling hands. It took minutes, sometimes hours, for the world to feel real again. For the shadows in the corners of his room to fade into mere shadows, and not the shapes of the dead. For the silence to stop feeling like the calm before another scream. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't over. It never was. The nightmare would return. It always did. Ghost moved toward where his men said the farm had been spotted, his boots scrunching softly against the dirt. 2 other clones flanked him, weapons in hand, faces hidden behind dragon masks. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, the rustle of wind through the trees the only sound accompanying their march. "What's the situation at the school?" Ghost asked, brushing aside a low-hanging branch with a gloved hand. One of the clones promptly answered. "When we found the school, we discovered it was mostly filled with students and a couple of teachers. They were hesitant at first and didn't want to open the doors." The other clone let out a short grunt of agreement. "Said they didn't have room," which was a lie, and didn't want to risk the survivors. "We saved turning and infecting Thema, but," the first clone continued, tone dry, "after seeing how armed we were, and our masks, they got real agreeable, real fast. We should be able to take over in a couple of weeks if nothing goes wrong." Ghost said nothing, but a slow nod told them to go on. "They're still on edge," the second clone added, tossing Ghost a device. "It's gonna take a while for them to warm up to us, but they'll get there." He gave a low hum of acknowledgement, glad that it wasn't he who had to deal with that headache. Trust didn't grow overnight, especially not in a world like this. His eyes narrowed as they stepped into a clearing, the shadows pulling away to reveal the silhouette of a large, 2-story farmhouse just beyond a thin tree line. He came to a halt, lifting one hand, and the others stopped instantly. "There," he said, voice low and quiet, yet sharp like a blade drawn in the dark. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney, and Ghost wasn't sure if that was a good thing, a broken bar, or a problem that needed to be solved. "The others should be nearby. They might have seen something while we were gone." Ghost's eyes never left the farmhouse as he reached out through the link. "Unit Echo, report in." The message rang out like a whisper in his mind, carried across the mental link that all of them shared. There was a pause. Then, like a ripple on a still pond, responses echoed back one by one. "Nothing suspicious so far, but we shouldn't relax until we're 100% sure. 3 adults, 2 men, and 1 woman. As far as we can see, they are just by themselves. We have yet to actually look around the farm, mostly waiting for orders before doing anything." Ghost narrowed his eyes at the farm, but didn't move. "Armed?" "Yeah, but barely. They have a hunting rifle and 2 crossbows. There are tools in the barn they can use as weapons, but they seem more comfortable with their guns and crossbows than anything else." Ghost gave a hum, his mind processing the report as he and the 2 with him advanced toward the edge of the tree line. The brush opened up into a broader view of the land, worn-down fence lines, patches of once-tended crops, and the weathered red barn standing near the farmhouse. "Everything looked a broken bar, quaint. They're either the most functional survivors we've seen," a broken bar Ghost muttered, "or they're hiding a hell of a lot more than they're showing." The moment they emerged from the trees, 3 more clones appeared to greet them. One of them, Watcher, stepped forward and passed Ghost pictures of the people who may or may not be cannibals. "We mapped out the area from all possible points," he said, voice low. "And we found bear traps with no release latches towards the east and west side. Either the latches broke and they're still using it out of necessity, or our broken bar." He didn't bother to finish as his fingers tapped the photo of what they saw to Ghost. Ghost's gaze swept the barn and then the porch where a woman had just come out with a steaming cup of something in her hands. "It didn't sit right." "PFFT, cannibals, not like we haven't dealt with them before," a clone sighed, getting a nod from the one standing beside him. "Poor number 53 almost had his arm turned into a meal. Couldn't be me." "It wasn't his fault," Watcher added grimly, remembering the people who tried to take down Clone 53 only to get a rude awakening when they realized incapacitating agents don't work on them. They act like saints, and by the time you notice something's off, you're already on a plate. Ghost turned back to the group and gestured for them to come close. "All right," he said, keeping his voice sharp and cold. "We're going to take this slow, no rushing in. We confirm who they are, what they're hiding, and if we see bullshit, we take them out. We can use the farm to raise livestock." The others nodded without hesitation. "Watcher, take a team and block any escape routes in case things go south." Watcher was already signaling to 3 others to follow him. 67, Ghost called out, getting the numbered clone to step forward. "You and your unit get inside that barn. I want to know if they're hiding bodies, skeletons, chains, anything they don't want us to see." 67 and his men disappeared into the night, heading towards the barn. "And if they're actually good people?" another clone asked. Ghost paused as he checked the masks he had inside the limited storage of his own mask. "Then we make them an offer a broken bar, but we all know that's not going to happen with how everything from our nightmares is turning out," he answered tiredly, already expecting the worst. While tapping the side of his head, 3 masks silently appeared in his hand, ominously gleaming underneath the moonlight. The smell of sizzling pizza floating across the motel was absolutely divine. Clementine sat by the fire, legs tucked under her, the warmth of the flames dancing across her face. Her plate balanced on her lap, already missing 2 slices. Her stomach was full, her cheeks hurt from smiling, and for once a broken bar she wasn't scared. It was weird. Everyone was just a broken bar happy. Kenny was laughing so hard at one of his own dumb stories that he nearly dropped a slice right into the fire. Duck, of course, found that hilarious and was doing that full-body kid laugh, the kind that made you giggle even if you didn't understand the joke. Katja smiled gently, resting a hand on her son's back while she quietly ate, her eyes softer than Clementine had ever seen them. Lee, Mark, and Carly were sitting on an old picnic table nearby, arguing about something. Lee swore he saw a walker that looked exactly like Chris Evans, and Carly was pretending to be deeply offended by it. They were loud, but in the best way, the "no one's trying to kill us tonight" kind of loud. Lily sat a little off to the side with her arms crossed, but even she wasn't scowling. She had an extra plate by her side with 3 slices untouched, as if saving them for someone. Her father was sitting beside her, grunting every now and then between bites of pizza like it was the best damn thing he'd ever tasted and he didn't want anyone to notice. And right next to her, close enough that their knees were almost touching, was Leo. He was sitting cross-legged, one hand holding his plate, the other tossing small twigs into the fire every few seconds, just to hear the crackle and watch the sparks jump. "I still think you're lying," Leo said, glancing her way. Clementine giggled, brushing a few stray hairs from her face as she took another bite. "But I'm not. You expect me to believe that he said while pointing at her. "Never once watched Mary Poppins while growing up?" "Nope. Not once a broken bar." "Did you even have a childhood?" She laughed harder at that and nearly choked on the crust of her pizza. Leo smirked, eyes twinkling under the firelight as he got up. "Well, I can't just let this be. Hold on, I need to get a couple of things from the car. I'll be right back." She watched him go, curious about what exactly he was going to get, as he seemed to have grabbed 2 of his guys to help him. She looked around at everyone again, watching the way the light touched their faces, how the air was filled with laughter, warmth, the sound of someone cracking open a soda can, and even Larry's annoyed muttering as Duck tried to sneak a second slice from his plate. It was perfect. Not the kind of perfect you dream about, or see in movies. It was a messy, tired, lived-in kind of perfect. The kind that made you feel like, maybe, just maybe a broken bar things would be okay. "You two seem to be getting along," a voice rumbled from behind her in a light, teasing way. She looked up and found Lee holding out a bottle of water for her, smirking while doing so. "Real close lately?" She took the bottle and refused to meet him in the eye as she took a sip. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Lee chuckled, sitting down next to her as he took a bite of his pizza. "I mean, sitting by the fire, sharing food, giving each other looks when you think no one is looking. I dunno, Clem, kinda suspicious to me." Her face gained a light blush as she lowered her cap to hide her face. "We just get along really well, okay?" "Oh really?" he said, raising a brow with that look, the one that said, sure, keep lying to me, kid." "I'm not a exclamation mark." Clem was about to defend herself, but it was cut off by the sound of someone yelling, "Heads up!" Everyone turned toward the parking lot as Leo and two of his masked group members came back carrying something bulky between them. A tall metal frame, thick cords, and what looked suspiciously like a broken bar projector. Carly asked, blinking. Leo grinned as he slung a duffel bag over his shoulder. "Leo, what the hell are you doing?" Lily asked, voice filled with exhausted curiosity. "Whoa, are we going to watch a movie?" Duck shouted excitedly as he bounced up and down. Kenny was just as excited as his son, but was better at hiding it. "Man, it's been so long since we last watched one." Katja held back her son, more worried than excited. "Are we sure this is a good idea? Wouldn't the movie attract walkers?" She got nods from a couple of others, especially Larry, who was about to say something less than nice before his daughter elbowed him. Leo just smiled at them, not a single concern or worry in his eyes. "It's fine. We checked the area and took out any walkers nearby in a mile radius, and if you're that worried, the guys will keep a lookout while we watch." Some were still unsure despite him reassuring them, but they slowly sat down despite that. The guys moved fast, stretching a big white sheet between two poles and pinning it down tight while Leo fiddled with the machine like he'd done it 100 times. He turned around and held up a very pristine Mary Poppins DVD like it was a sacred artifact. Clementine and Lee stared at him in total disbelief. "You had all that this whole time?" Clem asked, eyes wide as she looked at everything they brought. "Why?" Leo simply shrugged, a smile wide on his face. "Emergency morale boost. You'd be amazed what a spoonful of sugar can do." Lee let out a snort, looking at the disc and the boy with a raised brow. "Out to all the movies to keep during the apocalypse broken bar we had a choice between Mary Poppins and Son of the Mask." Leo deadpanned. "I regret nothing." Clem stared at him, her face somewhere between awe and "You're an idiot. Why on earth would he use the space for movies instead of something important like more food?" "Butte a broken bar. Why even bring it?" "Because," Leo said, putting the disc in, "someone told me they never watched it, and I believe in fixing childhood tragedies." She groaned and covered her face with both hands. "I hate you." "Telling lies are we, Tilda?" he teased, flopping back down beside her with a smug grin. The projector flickered to life with a soft hum, casting light against the makeshift screen. "And somehow, in the middle of the apocalypse, with half the world gone and the monsters outside the gate is a broken bar." The sound of music and Julie Andrews' voice started drifting through the motel courtyard. Clem looked around, watching as the people who went through hell with her were absorbed into the movie, a warm happy air surrounding them. She slowly turned to Leo, the boy, and his group, who did all this for people they didn't even know, and smiled gratefully at him. Feeling eyes on him, confused blue eyes met her warm hazel, as he tilted his head curiously at her. "A broken bar. Why are you looking at me like that?" She couldn't stop smiling. "Another terrible dream. Another horrific nightmare. A never-ending torture he has experienced for almost all his young life. Nightmares of walking corpses tearing the living apart. Dreams of people he has never met. Of a world in ruin and death. The kind that didn't fade when the morning light crept through the cracks in the window. The kind that burrowed into his soul and made a home there, festering like rot. For 15 years. For 15 long, merciless years, he had suffered through them every time sleep claimed him. A lifetime's worth of terror compressed into fleeting hours of restless sleep. Nightmares that crawled into his mind and planted their claws deep, never letting go. He no longer remembered what a peaceful sleep felt like. If such a thing had ever existed, it was gone now, erased from his reality. It always began the same way. A stillness in the air, as through the world itself was holding its breath. Then came the silence. Not the comforting kind, but a suffocating void, unnatural, absolute. And then it would begin. The screams. Oh God, the screams. They ripped through the stillness like jagged knives, filling the world with agony. Men, women, children, countless voices shrieking for mercy, for help, for salvation. All of it pointless. The nightmare unfolded before him like a hellish play, the scenes etched into his mind in grotesque clarity as he stood between it all, helpless to do anything. He saw burning cities and grumbling streets littered with corpses. He smelled the acrid stench of smoke and blood, choking the air like poison, and in the midst of it all, the walking corpses, shambling, broken, grotesque corpses, rising from the grave, skin hanging in strips from brittle bones, jaws stretched far too wide, eyes glassy and hollow yet burning with mindless hunger. They moved like puppets with tangled strings, limbs jerking and twisting in unnatural rhythms, their rotting mouths gnashing at the air. And the living, hunted, torn apart, devoured alive, screaming, begging, fighting, but dying all the same. It didn't matter if they ran, if they hid, if they fought tooth and nail against fate itself. Death always found them. He saw their faces each night, strangers and friends, people he had never met and those whose names he somehow knew despite having no memory of them. Mothers shielding their children, lovers dying in each other's arms, families shattered before his eyes. And worst of all, he saw himself, alone, always alone, standing there, in the middle of the carnage, his hands stained with blood. He tried to save them. God, he tried, but no matter how fast he ran, how hard he fought, he was always too late. Failure became his shadow, clinging to him like a second skin. But the nightmare never ended with the dead. Just when the horror seemed at its peak, the earth would tremble beneath his feet. The skies would split open like torn flesh, thunder screaming from the heavens. And then it came. A colossal shape, bigger than mountains, rising from the void beyond the sky. A monster. This thing was beyond comprehension, beyond nightmare. Its body stretched endlessly across the horizon, scales like blackened steel, wings blotting out the stars. And its heads twisted and turned in the sky. Hundreds of them, maybe more. Hundreds of snarling, twisting dragon-like heads, each one a grotesque reflection of wrath and hunger. Their eyes burned with power, mouths dripping with smoke and molten flame. They turned toward him, those countless heads glaring down at him as if he were a mere ant, and in that moment, he knew true insignificance. The monster opened its jaws with a deafening roar that shattered the world. A tidal wave of teeth and fire consumed everything in its path, corpses and living alike. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He screamed, but no sound left his throat. The last thing he ever saw was that endless maw swallowing him whole. The darkness consumed him. And then a broken bar he woke up. One gasping, choking, drenched in cold sweat. The world around him was still, dark, and silent, but his heart was racing like a trapped animal in his chest. His lungs burned as if he had truly been devoured, crushed beneath the weight of that monstrous being. But worse than the terror was the feeling, that suffocating sensation, as if something was wrapped around his face. His hands shot up instinctively, clawing at his skin, grasping wildly at his cheeks and eyes. His fingers scraped against his face, searching for it, that thing, something cold and suffocating that wasn't really there. But his face was bare. It always was. And yet every time he woke, the sensation lingered. A phantom mask, cold and heavy, pressed against his skin as though some cruel force had tried to bind him to that nightmare forever. His breaths came in ragged gasps as he curled forward, elbows on his knees, face buried in his trembling hands. It took minutes, sometimes hours, for the world to feel real again. For the shadows in the corners of his room to fade into mere shadows, and not the shapes of the dead. For the silence to stop feeling like the calm before another scream. But deep down, he knew the truth. This wasn't over. It never was. The nightmare would return. It always did. Ghost moved toward where his men said the farm had been spotted, his boots scrunching softly against the dirt. Two other clones flanked him, weapons in hand, faces hidden behind dragon masks. 3. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and pine, the rustle of wind through the trees the only sound accompanying their march. "What's the situation at the school?" Ghost asked, brushing aside a low-hanging branch with a gloved hand. One of the clones promptly answered. "When we found the school, we discovered it was mostly filled with students and a couple of teachers. They were hesitant at first and didn't want to open the doors." The other clone let out a short grunt of agreement. "Said they didn't have room," which was a lie, and didn't want to risk the survivors we saved turning and infecting Thema. But, the first clone continued, tone dry, after seeing how armed we were, and our masks, they got real agreeable, real fast. We should be able to take over in a couple of weeks if nothing goes wrong. Ghost said nothing, but a slow nod told them to go on. They're still on edge, the second clone added, tossing Ghost a device. It's gonna take a while for them to warm up to us, but they'll get there. He gave a low hum of acknowledgement, glad that it wasn't he who had to deal with that headache. Trust didn't grow overnight, especially not in a world like this. His eyes narrowed as they stepped into a clearing, the shadows pulling away to reveal the silhouette of a large, two-story farmhouse just beyond a thin tree line. He came to a halt, lifting one hand, and the others stopped instantly. "There," he said, voice low and quiet, yet sharp like a blade drawn in the dark. Smoke curled faintly from a chimney, and Ghost wasn't sure if that was a good thing, a broken bar, or a problem that needed to be solved. The others should be nearby, they might have seen something while we were gone. Ghost's eyes never left the farmhouse as he reached out through the link. "Unit Echo, report in." The message rang out like a whisper in his mind, carried across the mental link that all of them shared. There was a pause. Then, like a ripple on a still pond, responses echoed back one by one. "Nothing suspicious so far, but we shouldn't relax until we're 100% sure. 3 adults, 2 men, and 1 woman. As far as we can see, they are just by themselves. We have yet to actually look around the farm, mostly waiting for orders before doing anything." Ghost narrowed his eyes at the farm, but didn't move. "Armed?" "Yeah, but barely. They have a hunting rifle and 2 crossbows. There are tools in the barn they can use as weapons, but they seem more comfortable with their guns and crossbows than anything else." Ghost gave a hum, his mind processing the report as he and the 2 with him advanced toward the edge of the tree line. The brush opened up into a broader view of the land, worn-down fence lines, patches of once-tended crops, and the weathered red barn standing near the farmhouse. "Everything looked a broken bar, quaint. They're either the most functional survivors we've seen," a broken bar Ghost muttered, "or they're hiding a hell of a lot more than they're showing." The moment they emerged from the trees, 3 more clones appeared to greet them. One of them, Watcher, stepped forward and passed Ghost pictures of the people who may or may not be cannibals. "We mapped out the area from all possible points," he said, voice low, "and we found bear traps with no release latches towards the east and west side. Either the latches broke and they're still using it out of necessity, or our broken bar." He didn't bother to finish as his fingers tapped the photo of what they saw to Ghost. Ghost's gaze swept the barn and then the porch where a woman had just come out with a steaming cup of something in her hands. "It didn't sit right." "PFFT, cannibals, not like we haven't dealt with them before," a clone sighed, getting a nod from the one standing beside him. Poor number 53 almost had his arm turned into a meal. "Couldn't be me. One, it wasn't his fault," Watcher added grimly, remembering the people who tried to take down Clone 53 only to get a rude awakening when they realized incapacitating agents don't work on them. "They act like saints, and by the time you notice something's off, you're already on a plate." Ghost turned back to the group and gestured for them to come close. "All right," he said, keeping his voice sharp and cold. "We're going to take this slow, no rushing in. We confirm who they are, what they're hiding, and if we see bullshit, we take them out. We can use the farm to raise livestock." The others nodded without hesitation. "Watcher, take a team and block any escape routes in case things go south." Watcher was already signaling to 3 others to follow him. 67, Ghost called out, getting the numbered clone to step forward. "You and your unit get inside that barn. I want to know if they're hiding bodies, skeletons, chains, anything they don't want us to see." 67 and his men disappeared into the night, heading towards the barn. "And if they're actually good people?" another clone asked. Ghost paused as he checked the masks he had inside the limited storage of his own mask. "Then we make them an offer a broken bar, but we all know that's not going to happen with how everything from our nightmares is turning out," he answered tiredly, already expecting the worst while tapping the side of his head. 3 masks silently appeared in his hand, ominously gleaming underneath the moonlight. The smell of sizzling pizza floating across the motel was absolutely divine. Clementine sat by the fire, legs tucked under her, the warmth of the flames dancing across her face. Her plate balanced on her lap, already missing 2 slices. Her stomach was full, her cheeks hurt from smiling, and for once a broken bar she wasn't scared. It was weird. Everyone was just a broken bar happy. Kenny was laughing so hard at one of his own dumb stories that he nearly dropped a slice right into the fire. Duck, of course, found that hilarious and was doing that full-body kid laugh, the kind that made you giggle even if you didn't understand the joke. Katja smiled gently, resting a hand on her son's back while she quietly ate, her eyes softer than Clementine had ever seen them. Lee, Mark, and Carly were sitting on an old picnic table nearby, arguing about something. Lee swore he saw a walker that looked exactly like Chris Evans, and Carly was pretending to be deeply offended by it. They were loud, but in the best way, the "no one's trying to kill us tonight" kind of loud. Lily sat a little off to the side with her arms crossed, but even she wasn't scowling. She had an extra plate by her side with 3 slices untouched, as if saving them for someone. Her father was sitting beside her, grunting every now and then between bites of pizza like it was the best damn thing he'd ever tasted and he didn't want anyone to notice. And right next to her, close enough that their knees were almost touching, was Leo. He was sitting cross-legged, one hand holding his plate, the other tossing small twigs into the fire every few seconds, just to hear the crackle and watch the sparks jump. "I still think you're lying," Leo said, glancing her way. Clementine giggled, brushing a few stray hairs from her face as she took another bite. "But I'm not. You expect me to believe that," he said while pointing at her. "Never once watched Mary Poppins while growing up?" "Nope. Not once a broken bar." "Did you even have a childhood?" She laughed harder at that and nearly choked on the crust of her pizza. Leo smirked, eyes twinkling under the firelight as he got up. "Well, I can't just let this be." "Hold on, I need to get a couple of things from the car. I'll be right back." She watched him go, curious about what exactly he was going to get, as he seemed to have grabbed 2 of his guys to help him. She looked around at everyone again, watching the way the light touched their faces, how the air was filled with laughter, warmth, the sound of someone cracking open a soda can, and even Larry's annoyed muttering as Duck tried to sneak a second slice from his plate. It was perfect. Not the kind of perfect you dream about, or see in movies. It was a messy, tired, lived-in kind of perfect. The kind that made you feel like, maybe, just maybe a broken bar things would be okay. "You two seem to be getting along." A voice rumbled from behind her in a light, teasing way. She looked up and found Lee holding out a bottle of water for her, smirking while doing so. "Real close lately." She took the bottle and refused to meet him in the eye as she took a sip. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Lee chuckled, sitting down next to her as he took a bite of his pizza. "I mean, sitting by the fire, sharing food, giving each other looks when you think no one is looking. I dunno, Clem, kinda suspicious to me." Her face gained the light blush as she lowered her cap to hide her face. "We just get along really well, okay?" "Oh really?" he said, raising a brow with that look, the one that said, sure, keep lying to me, kid." "I'm no to exclamation mark." Clem was about to defend herself, but was cut off by the sound of someone yelling, "Heads up!" Everyone turned toward the parking lot as Leo and 2 of his masked group members came back carrying something bulky between them. A tall metal frame, thick cords, and what looked suspiciously like a broken bar. "A projector?" Carly asked, blinking. Leo grinned as he slung a duffel bag over his shoulder. "Leo, what the hell are you doing?" Lily asked, voice filled with exhausted curiosity. "Whoa, are we going to watch a movie?" Duck shouted excitedly as he bounced up and down. Kenny was just as excited as his son, but was better at hiding it. "Man, it's been so long since we last watched one." Katja held back her son, more worried than excited. "Are we sure this is a good idea? Wouldn't the movie attract walkers?" She got nods from a couple of others, especially Larry, who was about to say something less than nice before his daughter elbowed him. Leo just smiled at them, not a single concern or worry in his eyes. "It's fine. We checked the area and took out any walkers nearby in a mile radius, and if you're that worried, the guys will keep a lookout while we watch." Some were still unsure despite him reassuring them, but they slowly sat down despite that. The guys moved fast, stretching a big white sheet between two poles and pinning it down tight while Leo fiddled with the machine like he'd done it 100 times. He turned around and held up a very pristine Mary Poppins DVD like it was a sacred artifact. Clementine and Lee stared at him in total disbelief. "You had all that this whole time?" Clem asked, eyes wide as she looked at everything they brought. "Why?" Leo simply shrugged, a smile wide on his face. "Emergency morale boost. You'd be amazed what a spoonful of sugar can do." Lee let out a snort, looking at the disc and the boy with a raised brow. "Out to all the movies to keep during the apocalypse broken bar. We had a choice between Mary Poppins and Son of the Mask," Leo deadpanned. "I regret nothing. 5 Clem stared at him, her face somewhere between awe and "You're an idiot. Why on earth would he use the space for movies instead of something important like more food?" "Butte a broken bar. Why even bring it?" "Because," Leo said, putting the disc in, "someone told me they never watched it, and I believe in fixing childhood tragedies." She groaned and covered her face with both hands. "I hate you." "Telling lies are we, Tilda?" he teased, flopping back down beside her with a smug grin. The projector flickered to life with a soft hum, casting light against the makeshift screen. And somehow, in the middle of the apocalypse, with half the world gone and the monsters outside the gate's a broken bar, the sound of music and Julie Andrews' voice started drifting through the motel courtyard. Clem looked around, watching as the people who went through hell with her were absorbed into the movie, a warm happy air surrounding them. She slowly turned to Leo, the boy, and his group, who did all this for people they didn't even know, and smiled gratefully at him. Feeling eyes on him, confused blue eyes met her warm hazel, as he tilted his head curiously at her. "A broken bar. Why are you looking at me like that?" She couldn't stop smiling,